You're listening to Furrows of Flesh, Book 1 of the Blood of Empire series. We hope you enjoy your journey. Chapter 1. The Golden Chains. The air in the Dacian gold mines hung thick and heavy, a choking miasma of damp earth, sweat-soaked fear, and the metallic tang of blood long spilled. Dacia Corvinus swung her pickaxe with the rhythm of the damned, each strike echoing off the jagged walls like a futile cry against the unyielding stone. Her hands, calloused and scarred, bled freely into the dirt, but she dared not pause. To stop was to invite the lash, or worse, the fangs. It had been 3 years since the Romans came, their legions crashing through the Carpathian passes like a tide of iron and fire. Dacia remembered the smoke rising from her village, the screams of her kin as swords drank deep. She had been 18 then, her dark hair unbound and wild, her eyes fierce with the old god's fire. Now, at 21, those eyes were dulled by shadow, her body a map of bruises and hollows. The Romans had chained her with the others, herding them into these bowels of the earth where gold veins snaked like the god's own wrath. The mines sprawled beneath the Sarmizegetusa hills, a labyrinth carved by slave hands for Roman greed. Torches sputtered in iron sconces, casting flickering shadows that danced like mocking spirits. The air grew colder the deeper they delved, a perpetual chill that seeped into bones and souls. Dacia's tunic clung to her skin, ragged and filth-encrusted, her bare feet slipping on the slick gravel. Around her, the other Dacians labored in grim silence, men with backs bent like ancient oaks, women whose faces bore the hollow etch of despair. "Faster, you mountain dogs!" The overseer's voice cracked like a whip from the tunnel's mouth. Lucius Varro, a Roman centurion with skin pale as marble and eyes that gleamed unnaturally in the dim light. He was one of them, the night walkers, the blood drinkers whispered of in terrified murmurs. Dacia had seen it once, in the moonless hours when the guards thought the slaves slept. Varro had pinned a boy against the wall, his mouth fastened to the child's throat, drawing life in greedy gulps. The boy had withered like a leaf in flame, his eyes glassy before dawn claimed what was left. Dacia averted her gaze, driving her pick deeper into the rock. The gold here was fickle, hidden in narrow seams that demanded endless toil. Her muscles screamed, but she pushed on, her mind drifting to the old tales her grandmother had spun by the hearth. Stories of Purges, the child god ploughed from the earth, who read the future in steaming entrails. Foolish dreams now, in this pit of oblivion. A groan echoed from the far end of the vein. Dacia glanced up, her breath catching. Old Brennus, the wiry miner who'd shared his meager rations with her in the early days, clutched his chest and staggered. His pick clattered to the ground, the sound swallowed by the ceaseless din. "Brennus!" she hissed, dropping her tool and rushing to his side. The other slaves paused, their eyes darting fearfully. Varro's shadow loomed larger, his boots scraping the stone as he approached. "Back to work!" he snarled, but his voice held a predatory edge, nostrils flaring as if scenting weakness. Brennus collapsed to his knees, his face ashen, veins bulging black against his neck. "The dark. It's coming," he rasped, his gnarled hands grasping at Dacia's arm. She knelt beside him, her heart pounding. He'd been fading for weeks, his body giving out under the relentless grind. But there was something more. Puncture marks, faint and healing, on his wrist from a disciplinary feeding the overseers claimed. "Hold on," Dacia whispered, though she knew it was futile. His eyes rolled back, breath rattling out in a final wet sigh. He slumped against her, lifeless. Varro reached them in 3 strides, his lips curling in disdain. "Another one? Pathetic. Drag him out." But his gaze lingered on Brennus's corpse, a hunger flickering in those crimson-tinged eyes. The other overseers, 2 more vampires, their Roman tunics stained with mine dust, gathered, murmuring in low Latin. Dacia's stomach twisted. They wouldn't wait for the body to cool. These creatures fed on the edge of death, savoring the last pulses of life. She stood, shielding Brennus with her body. "He was a good man," she said defiantly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The Dacian words felt like armor, though she knew Latin would serve better here. Varro laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "Good for digging, maybe. Step aside, girl, or join him." His hand shot out, fingers like iron clamps seizing her shoulder. Pain flared, but Dacia held her ground, something primal stirring within her. A spark she'd thought long extinguished. The other slaves shuffled uneasily, but none intervened. Fear bound them tighter than chains. One woman, Mira, whispered a prayer to Zalmoxis, the Dacian lord of the underworld. But it was drowned by the scrape of picks resuming their rhythm. Varro shoved Dacia aside, kneeling by the body. He tore at Brennus's tunic, exposing the slack chest. But instead of fangs, he paused, sniffing the air. No fresh blood left. Pity. Disappointment colored his tone as he signaled to his underlings. "Strip him for the cart. The wolves can have what's left after we inspect." Dacia watched, bile rising in her throat, as they hauled Brennus away. The vampire's feeding was selective. The strong for sport, the weak for necessity. But entrails. She'd heard rumors. The Romans, with their borrowed Etruscan rites, sometimes consulted the guts of the dead for omens before shipments of gold to Rome. Varro's kind twisted it, using the slave's innards as both divination and depraved ritual. That night, in the fetid slave barracks, a cavernous hollow, lit by a single brazier, Dacia couldn't sleep. The air reeked of unwashed bodies and despair, the snores and whimpers a dirge. Brennus's empty pallet beside hers mocked her. She rose, slipping past the snoring forms to the shadowed corner where the overseers dumped the offal. The smell hit her first. Coppery blood mingled with the sour rot of opened bowels. Moonlight slanted through a high grate, illuminating the pile. Brennus's body lay partially disemboweled, his abdomen a ragged cavity where Varro's blade had done its crude work. The heart was gone, claimed as a tribute, but the intestines coiled like pale serpents in the dirt. Dacia's hands trembled as she approached. Why? She wasn't a Haruspex, not trained in the arts her grandmother had only hinted at. But the pull was irresistible, like a thread tugging at her soul. Kneeling, she reached into the mess, her fingers slick with cooling gore. The entrails were warm still, steaming faintly in the chill air. She lifted a loop of intestine, holding it to the moonlight. Patterns emerged, twists and knots that spoke of paths untaken. Her vision blurred, the world tilting as a whisper unfurled in her mind. Not words, but images. Blood furrows plowed through earth, a child's form rising from the soil, eyes like polished obsidian. Gasping, Dacia traced the lines. The first vision struck like lightning, a chain snapping, golden links scattering like stars. Freedom. Her freedom, the end of this hellish toil. She saw herself standing tall, no longer bowed, the minds receding into shadow. A man loomed in the haze, his form cloaked in crimson, hand extended. Not Roman, not Dacian, something older, eternal. But the joy curdled. The vision deepened, the entrails pulsing in her grasp as if alive. Blood welled from unseen wounds, flooding the scene. Fangs glinted in torchlight, not Varro's crude hunger, but something refined, predatory grace. A city of marble and shadow, lists of names etched in red, her own blood called forth in ritual. Horror coiled around the promise of release, a bond forged in fire and vein, pulling her toward a fate where godhood and damnation entwined. Dacia dropped the gut, scrambling back. Her heart thundered, hands smeared crimson. Was it madness? The poison of exhaustion? Or had the old gods finally answered, cursing her with sight. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel. She froze as Varro emerged, his silhouette monstrous in the firelight. Had he sensed it? The air hummed with unnatural tension. "What are you doing, slave?" His voice slithered through the dark, eyes narrowing on the disturbed entrails. Dacia stood, wiping her hands on her tunic, chin lifted. "Paying respects. He was my friend." Varro stepped closer, his breath unnaturally cold against her face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his legionary scars a testament to battles long past. But the pallor, the way shadows clung to him. Undead, her people called them. Strigoi, blood thieves. "Respects?" he sneered, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron, nails digging in. "You'll pay for meddling. Or perhaps you'll serve. The centurion in Rome demands omens for the gold shipment, if you have the stomach for it." He released her abruptly, laughing low. "Tomorrow, girl. Clean this up. And forget what you saw." But his eyes lingered, as if he'd glimpsed the spark in her. Dacia nodded, throat dry, as he vanished into the shadows. She gathered the remains with shaking hands, burying them in the pit's refuse. The vision replayed in her mind. The chain breaking, the shadowed man, the blood rite. Freedom, yes, but at what cost? The mines pressed in, foreboding heavier than chains. Dawn crept in, grey and merciless. The slaves were roused by horns, shuffling to their labors. Dacia picked up her axe, the weight familiar yet altered. The prophecy burned in her veins, a secret fire. Varro watched her from the entrance, his gaze predatory, but she met it without flinching. As the day wore on, the feeding began. Not overt. No, the vampires were cunning. During the midday break, when overseers patrolled the shafts, one lagged behind. A young guard, newly turned perhaps, his fangs barely concealed. He cornered a limping elder near the water trough, whispering promises of mercy. Dacia heard the gasp, the wet tear of flesh. She turned away, but the sounds followed. Slurping, sighs of ecstasy mingled with the victim's whimpers. The air thickened with fresh blood scent, drawing Varro like a hound. He joined, not feeding but overseeing, ensuring the drain was measured, enough to weaken, not to kill outright. "Discipline maintains order," Varro said to the guard, wiping a stray droplet from his lip. His eyes flicked to Dacia, who pretended absorption in her bread crust. "Remember that, all of you." The slaves ate in silence. The victim's body slumped nearby, pale and breathing shallow. No one helped. To do so invited the same. Dacia's stomach roiled, the vision's horror echoing the reality. These were no mere men, but harbingers of Rome's true hunger. Afternoon brought deeper delving. The vein narrowed, forcing them to crawl on bellies, picks scraping inches at a time. Dust choked lungs, sparks flying like angry spirits. Dacia's arms ached, sweat stinging her eyes, but the prophecy sustained her, a distant light in the abyss. Then, a collapse. Rock groaned, tumbling in a cascade. Screams erupted as the tunnel mouth filled with debris. Dacia was thrown back, stones bruising her ribs. Coughing, she clawed free, the air thick with grit. Varro's bellow cut through. "Clear it! Now!" But panic spread. Slaves surged, some trapped, cries muffled. In the chaos, Dacia glimpsed opportunity. She slipped to the side tunnel, heart racing. The entrails vision had shown escape, but not how. Perhaps another reading? No time. Guards herded them back, whips cracking. 2 slaves lay buried, their fates sealed without divination. As night fell, the mines quieted. Dacia lay on her pallet, body throbbing, mind alight. The end was coming, the chains would break. But the horror. She felt it approaching, a shadow longer than Rome's. In the distance, Varro's laughter echoed, mingled with a fresh scream. The golden chains held fast, But for how long? The days blurred into a rhythm of agony. Dacia's hands blistered anew, the picks haft worn smooth by her grip. Whispers spread among the slaves, of rebellion, of God's stirring. Mira confided in her one eve, eyes wide. I saw you with the guts, Dacia. The old blood calls to you. Dacia hushed her, but the words lingered. Was it the blood? Her grandmother had spoken of Corvinus lineage, raven's sight, prophetic veins. Perhaps the conquest hadn't slain the divine spark. Varro summoned her the next morn. In his alcove, lit by oil lamps, he loomed over a table strewn with maps and gold nuggets. The girl with the stomach, he said, smirking. Read for me. The shipment leaves at new moon. Omens for safe passage. Dread coiled in her gut. Refusal meant death. She nodded, following him to the ritual slab, a flat stone etched with Roman eagles and faded Dacian runes. A goat was brought, bleating, its throat slit swift. Steam rose as Varro sliced the belly, entrails spilling hot and glistening. Read, he commanded, fangs glinting. Dacia approached, the scent overwhelming. Her hands, guided by instinct, parted the loops. Visions cascaded, ships laden with gold, storms parting, but undertones of betrayal. Blood in the hold, fangs at the helm. Favorable, she lied, voice steady. The gods favor Rome. Varro's eyes bored into her. Do they? Or do they whisper of chains breaking? He stepped close, breath icy. I saw you with the miner. Talent like yours. Wasted here. Fear prickled her skin. Did he know? Just a slave's whim, Dominus. He chuckled, dismissing her. But as she returned to labor, his words echoed the vision. The man in crimson. Was it him? No. Deeper. Ancient. That night, another feeding. The vampires gathered in the main shaft, selecting a strong youth for sport. He fought, fists flying, but they pinned him, fangs sinking in unison. Blood sprayed, the air alive with their moans. Erotic. Savage. Dacia watched from shadows, horrified, yet transfixed. The power, the intimacy of the drain. It mirrored her vision's bond, twisted. The youth survived, drained but alive, stumbling back to barracks. Dacia tended him, binding wounds, her touch gentle. It ends, she whispered. Soon. He nodded weakly, eyes haunted. Weeks passed, the prophecy sharpening. Each reading, stolen or forced, revealed fragments. Auction blocks in a distant city, a hand offering not chain but pact, blood mingling under marble arches. The horror loomed larger. Covens in shadow, hunts for divine vein, a plough blade thirsty for immortal heart. One eve, as thunder rumbled above, Varro cornered her again. You're marked, girl, for Rome. The general seeks seers. Your sight. It sings. Dacia's pulse raced. The end. When? Soon. Prepare for the chains of gold. No more dirt. His smile was cruel, promising torments beyond the mine. She returned to her spot, the weight of fate settling. Freedom from these pits. Yes. But into what abyss? The visions promised power. Love shadowed by blood, a war of empires and undead. The golden chains awaited, gleaming with peril. Chapter 2. Sold to the Enforcer. The chains around Dacia's wrists had long since bitten into her skin, turning raw flesh to scarred ridges that throbbed with every jolt of the cart. Weeks of grueling travel from the shadowed depths of the Dacian gold mines had blurred into a haze of dust-choked roads, the cries of fellow slaves, and the indifferent stares of Roman soldiers herding them like cattle toward the heart of the empire. Rome. The word alone evoked a storm of hatred in her chest. A fire stoked by the memories of her village razed, her kin slaughtered, and the golden veins of her homeland stripped bare by these conquerors. The cart creaked to a halt amid a cacophony of shouts and the stench of unwashed bodies mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and fear. Dacia lifted her head, her dark hair matted and tangled, falling like a veil over eyes the color of storm clouds. They had arrived at the slave markets, a sprawling labyrinth of wooden platforms and iron pens nestled in the shadow of the Capitoline Hill. Merchants barked prices, whips cracked against reluctant backs, and the air hummed with the desperate pleas of the auctioneer. "Up, barbarian! On your feet!" A guard yanked her chain, hauling her from the cart. She stumbled onto the packed earth, her bare feet sinking into the muck of spilled wine and offal. Around her, slaves of every hue huddled, Gauls with braided beards, Numidians with skin like polished ebony, and her own Dacian kin, their faces etched with the same hollow defiance she felt gnawing at her soul. They marched her to a holding pen, where a wiry overseer with a ledger inspected her like livestock. His fingers prodded her arms, her teeth lingering too long on the curve of her hip. "Dacian, eh? What's your skill, girl?" he demanded, his breath foul with garlic and cheap vino. Dacia met his gaze without flinching, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "I read the entrails. The gods speak through the blood and guts of the slain." The overseer's eyes narrowed, a greedy gleam sparking. Haruspec's skills were rare among slaves, prized by the elite for divining fates in the viscera of sacrifices. In Rome, where politics dripped with blood, such talents could fetch a fortune. "Prophetess, are you? We'll see how the crowd takes to that. Clean her up, make her presentable." They dragged her to a trough of brackish water, scrubbing her skin with rough cloths until it stung. Her simple tunic was replaced with a stola of rough wool, draped to accentuate her lithe form without granting dignity. As they oiled her hair and pinched color into her cheeks, Dacia's mind raced. The mines had taught her survival. Observe, endure, strike when the moment came. But Rome was no mine. It was a beast, and she was its latest morsel. The auction platform loomed ahead, a raised stage of weathered planks ringed by leering spectators. Patricians in togas of fine purple, merchants with fat purses, and even a few senators slumming it for exotic bargains. The auctioneer, a paunchy man with a voice like grinding stones, gestured her forward. "Lot 27, a Dacian beauty, untouched by the plough of time, barely 20 summers. But it's not her face that fetches the price, no, gentlemen. This one reads the future in the steaming entrails of beasts and men alike. A true Haruspex, schooled in the old ways of the barbarians. Imagine her at your villa, divining victory in the games or the favor of the gods for your elections. Starting bid, 200 sesterces." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 200 was a pittance for a common slave, but for a seer. Heads turned, coins clinking as bids began to climb. Dacia stood tall, chin lifted, refusing to let her gaze drop. Let them see her spirit unbroken. It might buy her a kinder master, or at least a quicker end. 250, 300 from the wool merchant there. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, but a new voice cut through the din, deep and resonant, carrying the weight of command. 1,000 sesterces. Silence fell like a shroud. All eyes turned to the bidder. A man standing at the edge of the crowd, his presence parting the throng as if by invisible force. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a military cloak of deep crimson edged with gold, the mark of a high-ranking officer. His face was chiseled, severe, with high cheekbones and a jaw that spoke of battles won and enemies crushed. But it was his eyes that seized Dacia's breath, pale as moonlight on marble, unblinking, holding secrets older than the hills of Rome. The auctioneer stammered, recovering with a grin. 1,000 from the noble general. Do I hear 1,100? No one spoke. The wool merchant shrank back, and even the patricians exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers hissed. Marius Sanguis, Sulla's enforcer. The man who carried out the proscriptions without mercy, whose name alone sent heads rolling from the forum walls. Sold to the general for 1,000 sesterces. The gavel slammed down, and Dacia's world tilted. Guards unshackled her from the platform, thrusting her toward her new master. She approached warily, her heart pounding like war drums. Up close, Marius Sanguis was even more imposing. His skin was unnaturally smooth, devoid of the scars that marred most soldiers, and a faint scent clung to him. Not sweat or iron, but something metallic like fresh spilled blood mingled with myrrh. He regarded her without expression, his gaze piercing as if peeling back her layers to the bone. "You are the Haruspex?" His voice was low, cultured, with a trace of an accent she couldn't place, older than Latin, perhaps Etruscan. Dacia swallowed, forcing steel into her reply. "I am Dacia Corvinus, daughter of the Carpathians. And yes, I read the signs the gods leave in flesh." A flicker crossed his features. Amusement, disdain. "Bold for a slave. You'll need that fire. Come." He turned, expecting obedience, and she followed, her bare feet padding after his booted strides through the milling crowd. Slaves and merchants parted like the Red Sea before Moses, whispers trailing in their wake. Dacia's mind whirled. Why her? 1,000 sesterces could buy a dozen beauties or a team of oxen. There was purpose here, dark and unspoken. They emerged from the market into a side street where a litter awaited, borne by 4 burly slaves in livery of black and gold. Marius gestured her inside without a word, climbing in after her. The curtains drew shut, plunging the interior into dimness scented with leather and incense. Dacia pressed against the far wall, her body coiled like a serpent ready to strike. "What do you want with me?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the confined space. Marius leaned back, his long legs stretched out, invading her space without touch. "Sulla's proscriptions demand precision. Names on the lists must be confirmed. Your skills will serve in reading the fates of those marked for death. Proscriptions." The word chilled her. Sulla's bloody edicts, lists posted in the forum naming enemies to be killed on sight, their heads worth bounties. Thousands had fallen already, their blood paving the lucky general's path to dictatorship. To read entrails for such slaughter? "I am no butcher's tool," she spat, her fists clenching. "The gods do not whisper lies to justify murder." His eyes gleamed in the low light, pupils dilating like a predator's. "The gods? In Rome, we make our own gods, girl. And you will read what I tell you to read, or your own entrails will decorate the forum." The threat hung between them, sharp as a gladius. Dacia held his stare, searching for weakness, but found only depths. Endless, cold, as if he had stared into more abysses than any mortal man. A strange heat prickled her skin. Not fear alone, but something primal, drawing her toward him even as she recoiled. The litter lurched forward, carrying them deeper into the city. Through the curtains, Dacia glimpsed the grandeur of Rome. Marble temples rising like white teeth, aqueducts snaking across the sky, the distant roar of the Forum. But beneath it all lurked shadows, the underbelly where slaves like her vanished and blood flowed freer than the Tiber. "You think me a monster," Marius said suddenly, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I think you a Roman," she replied, the word laced with venom. A low chuckle escaped him, rumbling through the space like distant thunder. "Rome is built on monsters, Dacia Corvinus, and you may yet prove useful to one." She turned away, but his presence lingered, a weight on her senses. In the mines, prophecies had come in flashes, visions in the glint of gold, whispers in the drip of water. Here, in this enclosed world with him, a new sensation stirred, a pull, like threads of fate weaving unbidden between them. The litter halted outside a grand villa on the Palatine Hill, its walls frescoed with scenes of triumph and conquest. Slaves hurried to assist, but Marius exited first, offering her a hand she ignored, stepping down on her own. The overseer from the market approached, ledger in hand, but Marius waved him off with a purse of coins that clinked heavily. "Take her to the baths," he ordered a waiting servant. "Cleanse her properly. Then to the divination chamber. We begin tonight." Dacia was led away, but she glanced back, catching Marius's gaze lingering on her. In that moment she saw it, a subtle flash in his eyes, a hunger not for flesh alone, but for something deeper, ancient. His pallor seemed to glow against the dying sun, and she wondered, fleetingly, if the rumors were true, that Sulla's enforcers were more than men, touched by shades, or worse. The baths were a steamy haze of marble and echoing drips, attended by silent women who stripped her without ceremony. Hot water lapped at her skin, soothing the aches of travel, but doing nothing for the knot of dread in her gut. As they oiled and perfumed her, wrapping her in a fresh stola of fine linen, Dacia traced the tattoos on her arms, swirling symbols from her Dacian shamans, marks of prophecy that had saved her life in the mines. "What chamber is this?" she asked one attendant, a young Greek with downcast eyes. "The subterranean temple Domina," the girl whispered. "Below the villa, where the old gods sleep. Old gods. Etruscan, perhaps, before Rome swallowed them whole." Dacia's pulse quickened. The pull intensified, a whisper in her blood urging her downward. Escorted through torchlit corridors, she descended spiral stairs carved from living rock, the air growing cooler, heavier with the scent of earth and stone. The chamber opened before her. A vast cavern lit by braziers, walls adorned with faded frescoes of ploughed fields and emerging figures, an altar of black basalt at the center, etched with symbols she almost recognized. Marius awaited her there, his cloak discarded, revealing a tunic that clung to muscled arms scarred not by blade, but by something older, faint, silvery lines like veins of lightning. He held a basin of water, but no, not water. Crimson, viscous, the metallic tang assaulting her nostrils. "Blood," she breathed, stepping closer despite herself. "For the ritual," he confirmed, his voice a silken thread. "To bind your sight to the truths we need. Drink and see." Dacia hesitated, the chamber's shadows dancing like specters. This was no simple divination. It reeked of power, of pacts forged in darkness. Yet refusal meant death, and something in his eyes, those pale, unending eyes, promised more than chains. She took the basin, her fingers brushing his. A jolt passed between them, electric, forbidden. The blood was warm on her lips, tasting of iron and secrets, and as she drank, visions flickered, fields furrowed by divine plows, a child rising from the earth, eyes like his calling her name. Marius watched, his breath shallow, a rare crack in his composure. "Welcome to Rome, prophetess," he murmured. "Your chains are mine now." But as the blood burned through her veins, Dacia felt the truth. The chains bound them both. The market's clamor had faded, but its echoes lingered in Dacia's ears as the litter bore her away. No, that was earlier. Time blurred in the haze of the ritual's afterglow. She shook her head, focusing on the present. The subterranean chamber felt alive now, pulsing with an energy that matched the thrum in her blood. Marius set the basin aside, his movements precise, controlled. "The proscription list arrives at dawn. You will read the entrails of a sacrifice, a goat perhaps, or a traitor if one is convenient. Tell me who lives, who dies, and why the gods decree it so." "The gods decree nothing for your tyrant's whims," she countered, wiping her mouth, the taste lingering like a lover's kiss. "I saw something in the blood. Not entrails, but earth. A child of prophecy, buried and reborn." His expression darkened, a shadow crossing his features. "Visions can lie or be twisted. Focus on the task or I'll twist you myself." The threat held an undercurrent, not just of pain, but of possession. Dacia's skin flushed, traitorous heat coiling low in her belly. She was no simpering captive. She was Dacian fire, forged in mines and war. Yet this man, this enforcer, stirred embers she thought extinguished. "Twist me," she echoed, stepping closer, challenging. "You've bought my body, Roman. My sight is mine to give or withhold." He closed the distance in a blur, faster than any man should move, his hand cupping her chin with iron gentleness. His touch was cool, unnaturally so, sending shivers racing down her spine. Up close his breath held no warmth, only the faint echo of that blood scent. "Withhold and you die," he whispered, thumb tracing her lower lip. "But give freely, and perhaps you'll find Rome has more to offer than chains." Their eyes locked, the air thickening with unspoken tension. Dacia's heart hammered, a mix of fury and fascination. In his gaze, she glimpsed eternity, battles long past, blood spilled under alien suns. Vampire, the word whispered unbidden in her mind, a myth from Dacian tales of nightwalkers who drank life to defy death. He released her abruptly, stepping back as if burned. "Enough. Rest. Tomorrow you serve." As servants led her to a small chamber adjoining the temple, more cell than room with a pallet and basin, Dacia collapsed onto the straw, her body trembling. The blood's visions replayed. The plough, the child, and now, overlaying it all, his face. Marius Sanguis, blood soldier. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of furrows in flesh, where every cut revealed fates entwined. And in the depths of night she woke to the sound of footsteps. His? Pausing outside her door, lingering, then fading into silence. Dawn broke with the tolling of bells from the forum, summoning the city's heartbeat. Dacia was roused, dressed in a gown of deep red silk that clung like a second skin, the color of blood and empire. The fabric whispered against her, a constant reminder of her new reality. Marius met her in the temple, the altar now prepared with a bound goat, its eyes wide with terror. A knife lay beside it, bronze and etched with runes. "Begin," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. She approached, hands steady, the prophetic fire igniting within. The knife sliced clean, hot blood spilling over stone. As she parted the steaming entrails, symbols emerged, loops and whirls telling of death, betrayal, a list of names that would seal dooms. "This one," she said, pointing to a coiled intestine, "marked for the blade tonight. But wait, the liver speaks of mercy, a twist of fate." Marius leaned in, his presence a shadow over her shoulder. "Mercy is not on Sulla's list. Read again." Defiance surged. "The gods do not bend to tyrants. This man lives, or the omens turn against you." Tension crackled, their wills clashing like swords. He straightened, jaw tight. "Then we test the gods. Prepare the list." As she continued naming fates, Dacia felt the bond deepen with each revelation, a thread pulling her toward him, toward destiny's furrow. Rome's shadows hid horrors, but in Marius's eyes she saw her own reflection. A slave to prophecy, bound to a monster who might yet become her salvation. The day wore on in a rhythm of blood and prophecy, the temple's air thick with the iron reek. By evening, the list was scrawled on parchment, handed to a messenger who vanished into the twilight. Marius dismissed her with a nod, but his gaze followed her retreat, heavy with unspoken promises. Alone in her chamber, Dacia traced the tattoos on her skin, now tingling as if alive. The blood ritual had changed her. Visions came unbidden now, glimpses of Marius in ancient fields, ploughing earth that bled. And in every vision, she stood beside him, not as slave, but as equal. The clash of wills had only begun, but in the wary dance, attraction flickered. Dark, forbidden, inevitable. Outside, in the villa's halls, Marius poured wine that was not wine, his thoughts turbulent. The Dacian's fire challenged him, stirring echoes of a life before the turning, before Sulla's shadow. Her blood called to him, divine and potent, awakening hungers long sated by lesser fare. He drained the goblet, the liquid warming veins that ran cold as marble. Tomorrow's proscriptions would test her, and him. For in her eyes, he saw not just a tool, but a mirror to his damnation. And damnation, he knew, came laced with desire. Chapter 3. The Blood Ritual. The air in the subterranean temple of Purges hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and ancient incense, a cloying mix that clung to Dacia's skin like a second layer of chains. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls, where faded frescoes depicted priests with knives poised over steaming entrails, their faces twisted in ecstatic prophecy. She had been led here blindfolded from the slave markets, her wrists bound not with rope, but with silken cords that whispered against her flesh. A mockery of gentleness from her new master. Marius Sanguis moved like a shadow given form, his presence filling the chamber without a sound. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his tunic stained with the faint rust of old blood, and his eyes, God's, those eyes, burned with the cold fire of eternity. Dacia had glimpsed him at the auction, felt the weight of his gaze as he bid on her like one might a prized steed. But up close, in this buried sanctum, he was something more primal, a predator cloaked in Roman finery. "You will not need the blindfold now," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He reached for the cloth tied around her eyes, his fingers brushing her temple. The touch was cool, almost unnaturally so, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. Or perhaps everything. She blinked against the dim light, her dark eyes adjusting to the cavernous space. The temple stretched deeper than she had imagined, a labyrinth of alcoves carved from the living rock beneath Rome's bustling streets. At its heart stood the altar, a massive slab hewn from a single plough blade, its edge dulled by centuries but still etched with runes that seemed to pulse faintly in the torchlight. This was no mere Roman shrine. It reeked of older gods, the Etruscan spirits Rome had tried to bury along with their kings. "Why here?" Dacia asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. She was Dacian, born of the wild Carpathian hills, not some trembling Italic girl. But the air pressed on her, thick with unspoken rituals. "The Forum has its augurs. Why drag a slave into the earth?" Marius circled her slowly, his boots silent on the flagstones. "Because the Forum's seers are blind to the true currents of fate. They read birds and lightning, safe divinations for senators' games. But you read blood, entrails still warm with life. And this place," he gestured to the walls, where figures in the frescoes seemed to watch them, "remembers the old ways. Tages himself taught them here, ploughed from the furrow by divine will. Tages." The name stirred something deep within her. A flicker of memory not her own. A child's form emerging from the soil, eyes wide with forbidden knowledge. She shook it off, attributing it to the mind's madness, where she'd first tasted prophecy in a dead man's guts. "And Sulla's proscriptions. You think a Dacian witch can unravel his lists?" He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell the faint metallic tang on his breath. "Sulla does not ask. He commands. And I ensure his commands bear fruit. The lists grow longer each day. Enemies, rivals, innocents caught in the purge. We need to know who lives, who dies, not by ink on parchment, but by the god's own verdict. Your gift will serve that." Dacia lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. There was no cruelty in his eyes, only a hunger that mirrored her own buried fire. "And if I refuse?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, revealing the barest hint of fang. "Slaves do not refuse, Dacia Corvinus. But you will not want to. This ritual binds us. Your visions will be clearer, your power amplified. In return, you live. Not as chattel, but as my haruspex." She swallowed, the silken cords around her wrists tightening as she tested them. "Bind us!" The words carried a weight beyond servitude, an intimacy that made her pulse quicken. "What ritual?" Marius guided her to the altar, his hand firm on her elbow. The stone was cold beneath her palms as he positioned her, facing the plough blade's edge. From a hidden niche, he retrieved a chalice of blackened silver, etched with the same runes as the altar, and a dagger whose hilt was wrapped in dried sinew. The blood bond of purges. We share our essence, mingle it with the earth's memory. It will awaken what sleeps in you. Dacia's heart hammered. In the gold mines, she'd seen overseers bleed workers for sport, but this felt different. Sacred, profane. "And if it kills me?" "It won't." His assurance was absolute, yet his eyes darkened with something unspoken. "Lie back." She complied, the altar's chill seeping through her thin stola, raising gooseflesh on her tattooed arms. The prophetic symbols inked by Dacian shamans, ravens, ploughs, spilling blood, seemed to itch under his scrutiny. Marius loomed over her, the dagger glinting. "This will sting." The blade bit into her palm, a sharp line of fire, and blood welled, dark and rich. Dacia hissed, but held still as he pressed her hand over the chalice, letting droplets fall. Then, without hesitation, he sliced his own palm, deeper, and added his blood to hers. It was thicker, darker, almost black in the torchlight, and when it mingled with hers, the chalice warmed, steam rising as if the mixture boiled from within. "Now, the vow," he murmured, his free hand tracing the line of her jaw, thumb brushing her lower lip. The touch ignited sparks, forbidden heat coiling low in her belly. "By the blood of Tagus, I bind thee, Dacia, to see the fates unwritten. Your visions shall be mine, your power shared." She echoed the words, her voice husky, the air thickening with an electric charge. "By the blood of Tagus, I accept the bond." Marius lifted the chalice, tilting it to her lips first. The liquid was warm, metallic, tasting of iron and earth, with an undercurrent of something sweeter, like ripened grapes crushed underfoot. It burned down her throat, spreading fire through her veins. She gasped, arching against the altar as visions assaulted her. Flashes of ploughed fields, a child's laughter echoing from the soil, gods with eyes like polished obsidian watching from shadowed groves. He drank next, his throat working, a low groan escaping him. Their eyes met, and in that instant the bond snapped into place, a silken thread pulling taut between their souls. Dacia felt him, his ancient weariness, the weight of centuries, the flicker of doubt beneath his iron loyalty to Sulla. And he felt her, the wild spirit of the Dacians, the prophetic fire that had saved her from the mine's collapse, the loneliness of enslavement. The temple seemed to pulse, the frescoes coming alive. Figures stepped from the walls, ethereal forms clad in Etruscan robes, their skin pale as marble. At their center was Tagus, not the child of legend, but a youth with Dacia's own dark curls, his body marked with the same tattoos. He extended a hand, and knowledge flooded her. The arts of haruspicy, the reading of blood's currents, the secrets of immortality woven into Rome's foundations. You are him," Marius whispered, his voice strained, as if the visions gripped him too. He leaned closer, their bloodied hands clasping, the chalice forgotten on the altar. Reborn. The god ploughed under, rising again. Dacia's body thrummed with power, her senses sharpening. She could hear the distant drip of water in the catacombs, feel the earth's heartbeat through the stone. But it was Marius who anchored her, his cool presence a counterpoint to her burning veins. The bond pulled her toward him, an inexorable tide, awakening desires she'd buried under layers of survival. "What have you done?" she breathed, her free hand rising to tangle in his tunic, pulling him down. Their faces were inches apart, breaths mingling, hers warm and alive, his cool and eternal. Freed you, he replied, his eyes locking on hers, pupils dilating with the same hunger she felt. The ritual's intimacy blurred boundaries. The blood called to blood, stirring the vampire in him, the goddess in her. His mouth hovered over the cut on her palm, tongue flicking out to taste the remnants. The sensation shot through her like lightning, pooling heat between her thighs. She shouldn't want this. Her master, her captor, a creature of the night who'd enforced Rome's cruelties. Yet the bond whispered truths. His Etruscan roots, twisted by Roman ambition. His reluctant service to Sulla, born of survival, not zeal. And beneath it, a longing for something real, untainted by eternity's isolation. Dacia surged up, capturing his lips in a fierce kiss. He froze for a heartbeat, then responded with a growl, his body pressing her back against the altar. The kiss was blood-salted, desperate, tongues tangling as the visions swirled around them, Etruscan gods blessing the union, plows carving furrows of fate. His hands roamed, cool fingers slipping beneath her stola, tracing the curves of her hips, igniting fires she'd thought extinguished in the mines. This. We cannot, he murmured against her neck, fangs grazing her pulse, not breaking skin but teasing the edge of ecstasy and pain. Yet his body betrayed him, hard against her thigh, the ancient vampire yielding to mortal passion. The bond demands it, she whispered, arching into his touch, her nails digging into his shoulders. The power surged, her tattoos glowing faintly, and she felt his mind brush hers. Images of battles fought in shadows, blood feasts under moonlit skies, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Marius pulled back slightly, his breath ragged, eyes stormy. Sulla's enforcer and a slave prophetess. Forbidden doesn't begin to cover it. Then let it be our rebellion, Dacia said, her voice laced with newfound authority. The awakening coursed through her, Tiges's essence blending with her Dacian fire, making her bold. She pushed him onto his back on the altar, impossible for a mortal against a vampire, yet the bond equalized them and straddled him, her stola falling open. He watched her with reverence and desire, hands gripping her waist. You are no longer just Dacia. I am more, she agreed, leaning down to kiss him again, slower this time, savoring the contrast of their skins, her warmth to his chill. The ritual's energy hummed between them, amplifying every touch. His fingers explored, parting the fabric, finding the heat of her core. She moaned into his mouth as he stroked, deliberate, drawing out her pleasure with a skill born of centuries. The visions intensified. Tages teaching blood rites to Etruscan kings, the Morrigan's shadow over Celtic warriors, blood bonds forging empires and breaking them. Dacia rocked against his hand, the pressure building, her power flaring. She felt Marius's restraint fraying, his vampire nature urging him to claim, to feed, but the bond held him in check, turning hunger to worship. Dacia! His voice was a plea, hips bucking as she freed him from his tunic, her hand wrapping around his length, hard, throbbing, impossibly alive for the undead. She guided him inside her, gasping at the fullness, the coolness that warmed with their joining. They moved together, the altar shaking faintly, runes igniting in response. The gods watched, approving, as climax built like a storm. Dacia cried out first, her release crashing over her, visions exploding in a cascade of divine light. Marius followed, a guttural roar escaping him, his seed spilling hot despite his nature, the bond sealing their fates entwined. They lay panting, entwined on the sacred stone, the chalice's remnants drying nearby. The temple quieted, shadows retreating, but the change lingered. Dacia's eyes opened, now flecked with gold, Tages's mark upon her. The proscriptions, Marius said after a time, his hand stroking her hair. You can read them now, truly. But at what cost? She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. The cost of God's awakening. Sulla will fear this, and others. They will hunt me. He nodded, pulling her closer. Let them come. You are bound to me now. No one takes what's mine. But in her mind, the visions whispered of greater trials, lists of the damned scrolling like rivers of blood, vampire covens stirring in the dark, a plough blade that could end eternities. The ritual had begun their path, but the furrows of flesh ran deep, leading to Rome's heart and its potential fall. As they rose, dressing in the dim light, Dacia felt the bonds pull, a constant hum of awareness. Marius was no longer just her master. He was her anchor, her temptation, her equal in divinity's shadow. And in the world above, the proscriptions waited, fates begging to be read and rewritten. The temple's entrance groaned as they ascended, the weight of the earth mirroring the burden now shared. But for the first time since the mines, Dacia felt not chained, but chosen. The blood ritual had forged her anew, and with Marius at her side, she would face the Empire's thirst. Yet as they emerged into the night air, a distant howl echoed from the forum. Hunters already scenting the divine blood stirred below. The game had truly begun. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Forum. The Forum Romanum pulsed with the frantic heartbeat of a city teetering on the edge of oblivion. Marble columns rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, casting long shadows over the throng of toga-clad senators, merchants haggling over scraps of fate, and slaves darting through the chaos like ghosts. The air reeked of sweat, incense, and the metallic tang of fresh blood, blood from the sacrifices on the altars, blood from the executions carried out in broad daylight under Sulla's merciless gaze. Prescription lists fluttered on wooden boards nailed to the rostra, names etched in red ink that seemed to writhe like living veins. One wrong glance, one whispered rumor, and a man could find his name added, his life forfeit to the dictator's whims. Dacia Corvinus clutched the edge of the wooden cart that bore her to this madness, her fingers white-knuckled against the splintered wood. The blood bond thrummed in her veins, a constant reminder of the ritual in the subterranean temple 3 nights past. Marius Sanguis sat beside her, his presence a dark anchor in the storm. His hand rested possessively on the hilt of his gladius, his eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory focus of a wolf among sheep. He was resplendent in his military lorica, the red cloak of a Roman general billowing behind him, but Dacia knew the truth beneath the facade. The immortal vampire, 8 centuries old, bound to her by blood and something far more dangerous. Desire. "Breathe, Dacia," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that cut through the din. His free hand brushed her knee, sending a jolt through the bond that made her skin prickle. The Forum is no place for fear. It feeds on it. She nodded, but her heart raced. The awakening had changed her. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, entrails twisting into prophecies, blood pooling into maps of fate. She was no longer just the Dacian slave from the gold mines. She was Tages reborn, the divine child ploughed from the earth, and the weight of it pressed on her like the chains she'd once worn. The cart halted near the base of the rostra, where a makeshift altar had been erected for the day's divinations. Slaves scurried to unload the sacrificial goat, its bleats a pitiful counterpoint to the crowd's murmurs. Marius descended first, offering his hand to Dacia with a formality that belied the heat in his gaze. She took it, feeling the cool strength of his immortal flesh, and stepped down into the fray. Eyes turned toward them immediately. Whispers rippled outward. The generals knew haruspects, the Dacian witch bought from the markets. Some gazes held curiosity, others lust. Men leering at the curve of her hips beneath her stola, women eyeing her with envy or disdain. But Dacia felt other stares. Colder. Hungrier. Vampires lurked in the shadows of the porticos, their eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. "Stay close," Marius commanded, guiding her to the altar. His arm brushed hers, and through the bond she sensed his tension. A coiled spring ready to unleash. The priest in charge, a wiry man with a tonsured head, bowed low to Marius. "General Sanguis, the entrails await your interpreter. Sulla's lists grow longer by the hour." Marius nodded curtly. "Let her work." Dacia approached the altar as the goat was bound and its throat slit with a swift stroke of the knife. Hot blood sprayed across the stone, and she inhaled deeply, the scent awakening something primal within her. The crowd pressed closer, a sea of faces blurred by anticipation. She knelt, her hands steady as she parted the steaming viscera, the goat's innards spilling out in a glistening heap. The world narrowed to the patterns before her. Loops of intestine formed the outline of Rome's 7 hills. The liver bore dark spots like the prescribed names. But as her fingers traced the lines, the bond with Marius surged, amplifying her sight. Visions flooded her. A young man with sharp features hiding in the shadows of the Basilica Aemilia, his name, Caius Cassius, scratched onto the latest list. Innocent, yet marked by a rival's envy. Further, she saw covens stirring in the underbelly of the city, scents of her divine blood drawing them like moths to flame. "Speak witch," a voice shouted from the crowd. Dacia's eyes snapped open. "The gods favor the just," she declared, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "Caius Cassius lives. His thread is not severed. Remove his name, or the entrails will curse the hand that writes it." Gasps echoed through the forum. The priest paled, glancing at Marius, who gave a subtle nod. Messengers darted to the boards, erasing Cassius's name under the watchful eyes of the guards. From the edge of the crowd, a figure emerged. A young man in a simple tunic, his face pale but resolute. Cassius the younger pushed forward, falling to his knees before the altar. "Goddess preserve you," he whispered, his eyes wide with gratitude. "I am in your debt. My father sits the Senate, but Sulla's dogs bay at our door." Dacia met his gaze, seeing the flicker of republican fire in him, the dying embers of a Rome not yet drowned in blood. "Rise, Cassius. The gods see your heart." Marius stepped between them, his hand on Cassius's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie masking warning. "Go now. Speak of this to no one." Cassius nodded and melted back into the throng, but not before Dacia felt a pull toward him, a thread of alliance weaving in her prophecies. The divination continued, Dacia reading fate after fate, her pronouncements saving a handful more from the lists. Each one chipped at Sulla's iron rule, and with every alteration, the bond with Marius tightened, sending pulses of shared power through their veins. His eyes lingered on her, dark with something beyond duty, hunger perhaps, or the first stirrings of affection in his ancient heart. But the forum's shadows lengthened, and with them came danger. From the steps of the temple of Castor and Pollux, a woman approached, her gown of imperial purple flowing like spilled wine. Fausta Cornelia, Sulla's daughter, her beauty a sharpened blade. Her lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes that fixed on Dacia with predatory jealousy. "General Sanguis," Fausta purred, her voice silk over steel. "Your pet Dacian performs miracles. Or is it sorcery? Father will be most interested." Marius's jaw tightened. "The entrails speak true, Lady Fausta, as they always have." She circled the altar, her gaze raking over Dacia. "And what do they say of you, little prophetess? A slave playing at gods? Careful, or the real gods may claim you." Dacia held her ground, the blood in her veins singing with defiance. Through the bond, she felt Marius's urge to strike, restrained only by politics. "The gods claim what is theirs, my lady. No more. No less." Fausta laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Bold words for a chained bird. Come, Marius. Father summons us to the villa tonight. Bring your toy if she amuses you." She departed with a swirl of her cloak, but Dacia sensed the venom left behind. Spies in her wake, whispers to carry tales of the Dacians' unnatural insight. As the sun dipped toward the Capitoline Hill, The crowd thinned, executions claiming those whose fates Dacia could not save. Bodies slumped in the gutters, blood mingling with rainwater to form rivulets that snaked toward the Cloaca Maxima. Marius pulled Dacia aside into the shadowed portico of the Basilica Julia. "You altered more than Cassius's name," he growled, pinning her against a column. His body pressed close, the heat of him, impossible for a vampire, born of the bond. "Sulla will notice. Fausta already suspects." Dacia's breath hitched, her hands fisting in his tunic. "I couldn't let them die for nothing. The visions, they demand justice." His eyes bored into hers, centuries of bloodshed reflected there. "Justice? In this Rome? You're playing with fire, Dacia, and I'm the one who'll burn." The bond flared, drawing them closer. His lips hovered inches from hers, the temptation to taste her divine blood warring with restraint. She felt it too. The addictive pull, her humanity fraying at the edges as godhood beckoned. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, feeling the faint scar from battles long past. "Then burn with me," she whispered, rising on her toes. Their kiss was a clash of worlds, mortal fire meeting immortal ice, blood and breath mingling in a promise of ruin. His hands roamed her sides, bunching the fabric of her stola, while hers tangled in his hair. The world faded, the forum's chaos a distant roar, until a scream shattered the moment. They broke apart, weapons drawn. From the alley beyond the basilica, shadows detached, figures cloaked in black, eyes glowing with vampiric hunger. Rival covens, drawn by the scent of Tages's blood wafting from Dacia's pores during the divination. "Hunters!" Marius snarled, shoving Dacia behind him. "Run to the cart!" But she wouldn't flee. The power surged within her, entrails of fate uncoiling in her mind. One hunter lunged, fangs bared. But Dacia whispered a prophecy, and the man's own shadow turned against him, wrapping around his throat like a noose. Marius fought like a tempest, his gladius singing through flesh and bone. Two fell to his blade, their bodies crumbling to ash under the fading light. But more emerged. 5, 6. Fausta's spies or independents seeking the prize of divine blood. Cassius reappeared then, sword in hand, having circled back. "I owe you, prophetess," he cried, joining the fray. His blade clashed with a hunter's mortal steel against immortal speed. Dacia channeled the bond, feeding strength to Marius. Their minds linked, visions guiding his strikes. Together they carved through the assailants, blood spraying in arcs that painted the marble red. The last hunter fell, but not before grazing Marius's arm, a shallow cut that healed almost instantly. Yet the poison of their intent lingered. Fausta's laughter echoed from afar, a taunt on the wind. Panting, Dacia leaned against Marius, the bond thrumming with shared adrenaline. Cassius saluted them. "The gods fight for you. If you need allies, seek me in the shadows of the Senate." He vanished into the twilight, leaving Dacia and Marius alone amid the gathering dusk. "This is only the beginning," Marius said, his voice rough. He cupped her face, thumb tracing her swollen lips. "They'll come for you now. For us." Dacia nodded, the weight of her emerging godhood settling heavier. But in his eyes she saw not just the enforcer, but a man torn, loyalty to Sulla fracturing under the force of their bond. The forum's shadows deepened, promising more chaos, more blood. And in that blood their fates were furrowing ever closer. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Villa. The carriage rattled over the uneven road leading away from Rome's chaotic heart, the clamour of the forum fading into a distant murmur as the sun dipped below the horizon. Dacia Corvinus leaned against the worn leather seat, her body aching from the day's exertions, the weight of entrails in her hands, the metallic tang of blood still clinging to her skin despite her frantic scrubbing. Beside her, Marius Sanguis sat in shadowed silence, his presence a brooding storm that both comforted and unnerved her. The blood bond thrummed between them like a living vein, pulsing with every jolt of the wheels. Villa Sanguinaria loomed ahead as twilight bled into night, its sprawling marble facade bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps flickering from arched windows. Vines heavy with night-blooming jasmine climbed the walls, their scent thick and heady, mingling with the earthy promise of rain. Slaves moved like ghosts in the courtyard, their eyes averted as the carriage halted. Marius descended first, extending a hand to Dacia. His touch cool, yet igniting sparks along her arm. She took it, feeling the pull of their connection deepen, a whisper of something forbidden stirring in her core. "Welcome to my sanctuary," Marius murmured, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, lingered on her face a moment too long. The villa was no mere estate. It was a fortress disguised as opulence, its cellars rumored to hold vaults of blood rather than wine. Dacia followed him through the grand atrium, where frescoes of ancient hunts depicted figures with fangs bared under a blood-red moon. Aradia awaited them in the inner peristyle, a vision of timeless elegance amid the bubbling fountain. She was neither young nor old, her skin pale as moonlit marble, hair cascading like raven silk down her back. Her gown, diaphanous and crimson, clung to curves that spoke of forgotten Etruscan goddesses. Eyes the color of storm clouds fixed on Dacia with an intensity that made the air hum. "The child of the furrow has returned," Aradia said, her voice a silken thread woven with power. She stepped forward, circling Dacia like a priestess appraising a sacred relic. "I am Aradia, keeper of the old blood. Sulla's wars have torn the veil, but you, Dacia, are the plough that will turn the soil once more." Dacia swallowed, the weight of prophecy pressing on her chest. "I am no goddess, just a slave with visions that bring death." Aradia's laugh was a soft chime. "Modesty suits the mortal shell, but the divine stirs within. Come, let us begin before the hunters scent your trail." Marius watched from the shadows, his jaw tight. "Keep her safe, Aradia. The covens are roused. Fausta's spies are everywhere." The older vampire inclined her head. "As you command, my lord. But remember, the bond you forged may yet command you." Their eyes met, a flicker of challenge passing between them. Dacia felt it too, the bond's insistent tug drawing her toward Marius, even as Aradia led her away to the villa's hidden chambers. The training began in a secluded wing, a room lined with shelves of ancient scrolls and vials of viscous crimson. The air was thick with incense, myrrh, and something sharper, like copper and earth. Aradia gestured to a low table where a basin of fresh blood awaited, drawn from the villa's veiled sources. "Blood is the river of fate," she instructed, her fingers tracing runes in the air that glowed faintly before dissolving. "Purges taught us to read its currents, not just the entrails it nourishes. You must learn to command it." Dacia hesitated, memories of the forum flashing, gore-slicked stones, screams echoing off marble. But this was different, intimate, seductive in its power. She dipped her fingers into the basin, the warmth surprising her, alive against her skin. The bond with Marius flared, a distant echo of his pulse mingling with hers. "Feel it," Aradia urged, her hand guiding Dacia's. "The blood remembers. It whispers of the old gods, buried when Rome's founders plowed them under. Purges was the first, plucked from the earth like a divine infant, his teachings etched in the veins of the world. You are his echo, reborn in Dacian soil to challenge the empire's thirst." Visions swam before Dacia's eyes, furrows of dark earth parting to reveal a child with eyes like polished jet, teaching cloaked figures to divine the future in spilled life. Etruscans before Rome swallowed their mysteries. Vampires, not as monsters, but as guardians of the blood rights, turned eternal by the god's own curse to preserve the balance. "Rome corrupted it," Aradia continued, her voice dropping to a husky murmur. Sulla's line twisted the gift into a weapon. The proscriptions are no mere politics. They are feedings, lists drawn in divine blood to sustain the undead Senate. But you, Dacia, you can rewrite the flow. Dacia's hand trembled as she pulled a thread from the blood, shaping it into a glowing filament. Pain lanced through her, sweet and sharp like the first taste of forbidden wine. Aradia nodded approval, her touch lingering on Dacia's wrist, cool and reassuring. Good. Now bind it to your will. Imagine the fates you glimpsed in the forum. Cassius spared, the hunters thwarted. Weave them anew. Hours blurred into a haze of incantations and crimson arcs. Dacia's tattoos, prophetic symbols inked in the gold mines, burned with renewed fire, glowing under her skin. She collapsed onto a cushioned divan as the session ended, sweat beading on her brow, the room spinning with residual magic. Aradia knelt beside her, brushing a damp strand from Dacia's face. Rest, child. The heritage weighs heavy, but it will make you strong. Tomorrow we delve deeper into the vampire annals, the wars that birthed us, the plough that could end us. Dacia nodded weakly, but her thoughts drifted to Marius. The bond pulled her toward him, a magnetic ache low in her belly. Night had fully claimed the villa when Dacia wandered the corridors, drawn by instinct to the gardens. Moonlight filtered through olive branches, casting silver patterns on the flagstones. She found Marius there, stripped to the waist, practicing forms with a gladius. His body was a map of scars, centuries of battles etched into marble-hard muscle. Sweat gleamed on his skin, not from exertion, but from the eternal chill of his kind, warmed only by the bond. He sensed her before she spoke, turning with predatory grace. You should be resting. Aradia's lessons are demanding. As is your gaze, she replied, stepping closer. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken hunger. The bond sang, visions of their ritual in the temple flashing, his blood on her lips, her power awakening in his arms. Marius sheathed the blade, closing the distance. The villa's walls hide many whispers, Dacia, but none as dangerous as ours. Her breath caught as he traced a finger along her jaw, cool against her flush. Teach me more than magic, Marius. Show me what this bond truly means. His eyes darkened, restraint fracturing. He pulled her into the shadows of a pergola draped in vines, their lips meeting in a clash of need. The kiss was fire and ice, his fangs grazing her tongue, drawing a bead of blood that he lapped with a groan. Dacia arched against him, hands exploring the ridges of his abdomen, feeling the unnatural strength coiled beneath. We cannot, he whispered, even as his hands roamed her curves, bunching her stola. Sulla. The covens. Let them come, she breathed, nipping his lower lip. The bond amplified every touch, sending waves of pleasure crashing through her. She pushed him onto a marble bench, straddling his lap, the fabric between them a tormenting barrier. Marius's control shattered. With a growl, he tore her gown, exposing her to the night air. His mouth descended on her breast, fangs pricking just enough to draw crimson rivulets that he traced with his tongue. Dacia gasped, grinding against him, the friction igniting stars behind her eyes. The villa's whispers faded, replaced by their ragged breaths and the slick sounds of skin on skin. He flipped her beneath him, entering her in one fluid thrust, their bodies merging as the bond wove tighter. Each movement was a revelation, his coolness warming within her heat, her pulse thundering in his veins. She clawed at his back, urging him deeper, lost in the erotic symphony of their union. Climax built like a divination spell, cresting in a shared ecstasy that left them trembling, blood-smeared and sated. As they lay entwined, Marius's voice was a rumble against her throat. This desire will be our undoing, or our salvation. Dacia traced the scars on his chest. Then let it undo us. Dawn crept in, but they lingered in the garden's embrace, the bond a silken chain binding them closer. The next day, Aradia led Dacia to the villa's secret library, a cavernous room buried beneath the blood vaults. Torchlight danced on walls lined with codices bound in human skin, their pages whispering of pre-Roman knights. "Here lies the history Sulla seeks to erase," Aradia said, unrolling a scroll depicting the first turning. The catacombs where Etruscan priests, desperate to defy death, bargained with Purges' blood. "Vampires were not born of curse, but choice," Aradia explained, her fingers caressing faded illustrations of robed figures drinking from a plough-shaped chalice. Purges gifted eternity to protect the divinations from mortal decay. But Rome's founders, Romulus and his wolf-born kin, saw power, not balance. They imprisoned the old gods, twisting the gift into a tool of conquest. Marius was one of the first turned, an Etruscan warrior bound to serve the new order. Dacia's heart ached at the thought of Marius's long servitude. And Sulla? A pretender elder, feeding on the proscriptions to swell his coven. He fears you because your blood could unmake him, restore Tages, and shatter the chains. Training resumed with renewed fervor. Dacia shaped blood into shields and blades, her control growing as Aradia chanted ancient hymns. Visions of vampire history flooded her. Epic battles in moonlit forums, betrayals in senatorial halls, the plough of Purges hidden in the catacombs as the ultimate weapon. Between sessions, stolen moments with Marius fueled her strength. In the villa's baths, steam rising like incantations, he washed the blood from her skin, his touches lingering into caresses. "Your power calls to me," he confessed, pinning her against the mosaic tiles, water cascading over them as they coupled again. Slow, deliberate, each thrust a vow. Dacia learned to draw from the bond, siphoning Marius's ancient knowledge through their intimacy. Flashes of his past, the Etruscan fields where he first tasted immortality, the wars against Celtic blood gods like the Morrigan's echoes. Their desire was no mere lust. It was a ritual, forging her godhood in the fire of their passion. One evening, as thunder rumbled outside, Aradia gathered them in the peristyle. "The heritage is yours, Dacia. But knowledge demands sacrifice. To wield the old magic, you must confront the plough's shadow, the death it brings even to immortals." Marius tensed beside Dacia, his hand finding hers under the table. The bond hummed with his unease, mingled with unwavering resolve. "I am ready," Dacia said, meeting Aradia's gaze. But in her heart, she knew the true test lay not in magic, but in the love blooming amid the blood and shadows, a love that could either elevate them to divinity or drag them into eternal night. As rain lashed the villa, whispers of approaching hunters echoed in the wind, a prelude to the purges to come. Chapter 6: The First Purge. The moon hung low over the Forum Romanum, a sickle of silver slicing through the veil of night. Torches sputtered along the marble colonnades, casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres across the sacred ground. The air was thick with the metallic tang of fierce sweat and the acrid smoke of sacrificial fires, long since perverted into pyres for the damned. Prescription lists, etched in fresh wax on towering tablets, gleamed under the flickering light. Names of the condemned, their fates sealed by Sulla's unyielding hand. The Republic's heart pulsed with death, and tonight it would bleed. Marius Sanguis moved through the chaos like a shadow given form, his crimson cloak billowing behind him as he led his squad of enforcers. At his side, hooded and silent, walked Dacia Corvinus, her Dacian tattoos hidden beneath a slave's rough-spun tunic. The blood bond thrummed between them, a constant undercurrent that made her presence both torment and necessity. She could feel his hunger, a low growl in her veins, mirroring the unrest in her own soul. Since the ritual in the temple, her visions had sharpened, whispers of fate coiling around her like serpents. But tonight, Those whispers demanded more than sight. They demanded action. Quintus the Blade Maximus flanked Marius, his gladius strapped tight to his belt, eyes scanning the milling crowds of refugees and opportunists. A mortal through and through, Quintus was Sulla's favored hound, ruthless and unyielding. He spat on the ground as they passed a cluster of wailing women clutching faded scrolls that might have borne a loved one's name. "Another night of culling the weeds," he growled, his voice rough as gravel. "Sulla's list grows longer than the Tiber." Marius nodded curtly, his pale features impassive beneath the helmet of his legionary guise. 8 centuries had honed him into a weapon, but the bond with Dacia chipped at the edges of his resolve. "We take the eastern flank first," he said, his voice a low command that cut through the din. "The haruspecs will guide us to the marked ones. No mercy for those who resist." Dacia kept her gaze downcast, but her mind raced. The entrails she had read that afternoon in the villa's shadowed chamber had revealed paths of blood, fates intertwined like the veins of a sacrificial beast. But among the condemned, she had seen innocence. A senator's scribe who penned verses against tyranny, a healer who mended popularis wounds in secret. The gods, her gods, the old ones stirring within, whispered of balance, of furrows plowed not just for death, but for rebirth. Tonight she would test the vampire at her side. Would he cleave to Sulla's iron will, or bend to the pull of something ancient and shared? The squad pushed into the narrower alleys branching from the forum, where the grand temples gave way to the squalor of the Subura's edge. Torchlight revealed furtive figures darting between columns, their faces gaunt with terror. Marius raised a hand, halting the men. "Dacia," he murmured, close enough that his breath stirred the hood over her ear. The proximity sent a shiver through her, the bond igniting like embers fanned to flame. "What do you see?" She closed her eyes, letting the night's pulse flow into her. Visions flickered. A man with ink-stained fingers fleeing toward the Basilica Aemilia, his heart pounding like a war drum. But beneath it, a thread of mercy. She could unravel it, redirect the hunters. "There," she whispered, pointing east. "A scribe named Lucius Vorenus. He hides in the shadow of the rostra, clutching a satchel of forbidden writings." But in her mind, she wove a subtle lie, her prophetic gift twisting fate like a haruspex's knife through gut. Quintus snorted, drawing his blade with a rasp that echoed off the stones. "Lead on, witch. Let's make short work of him." The squad advanced, boots thudding in unison, the air growing heavier with the scent of impending violence. They found Lucius not at the rostra, but in a side alcove near the temple of Castor and Pollux, crouched behind a fallen pedestal. The man was young, barely past his 20th year, his eyes wide with the desperation of the cornered. "Please," he stammered as the squad surrounded him, "I am no enemy of Rome. My words were but poetry." "Poetry that slanders the dictator," Quintus interrupted, lunging forward. His blade flashed, aiming for the throat. But Dacia's intervention was subtle, a murmur under her breath invoking Tages' ancient rite. The shadows seemed to shift, a loose tile underfoot, causing Quintus to stumble just enough. The scribe bolted, vanishing into the labyrinth of columns. "After him!" Marius roared, his vampiric speed propelling him forward. Dacia followed, her heart hammering. Had he noticed? The bond pulsed with his confusion, a flicker of suspicion threading through their connection. The chase wove through the forum's heart, past the rostra where orators once thundered for the Republic. Screams echoed from other squads, the night's purge in full swing. Bodies slumped in the gutters, blood pooling like offerings to forgotten gods. Marius's senses sharpened, the hunt igniting his predatory instincts. He could taste the scribe's fear on the wind, mingled with the sweeter notes of Dacia's adrenaline-spiked blood. They cornered Lucius near the arch of Septimius Severus, or what would one day stand there, in this era merely a cluster of triumphal stones. The man whirled, a small dagger in hand, more for show than threat. "The gods curse you, Sulla's dogs," he spat. Quintus arrived panting, blade raised. "I'll have his head." But Marius stepped forward, his eyes locking on the scribes. In that moment, through the bond, Dacia felt Marius's turmoil, a war between duty and the nascent empathy she had stirred in him. "Stand down," Marius said finally, his voice a silken threat. Quintus gaped. "General." "He fights like a cornered rat. Not worth the blade tonight." Marius's gaze flicked to Dacia, hidden in the shadows, a question burning in their shared vein. She had altered this fate. He knew it. Quintus sheathed his weapon with a curse, but his eyes narrowed on Dacia. "The witch's guidance falters. Or is it sabotage?" The squad pressed on, the night deepening into a symphony of slaughter. They claimed 3 more from the list: a merchant who begged with gold, his throat slit mid-plea; a former tribune dragged from a tavern, his screams cut short by Quintus's efficient strike; and a woman, sister to a marked man, who fought with feral claws until Marius's hand clamped her neck, fangs grazing but not piercing. Sulla's orders were for execution, not turning. Blood slicked the flagstones, the forum a charnel house under the indifferent stars. Dacia's stomach churned, not just from the gore, but from the moral weight. Each death was a furrow in the earth's flesh, ploughed by Rome's insatiable hunger. Yet in saving Lucius, she had planted a seed, perhaps one that would grow into resistance. As the squad paused near the Lacus Curtius, Marius pulled her aside, his grip iron on her arm. The bond flared, hot and insistent, drawing their bodies close in the alcove's gloom. "What game do you play, prophetess?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. The scent of blood clung to him, intoxicating, stirring the divinity within her to respond. "I play no game," she lied, meeting his crimson-tinged eyes. "Fate is not ironclad. You felt it." The scribe's words held no true threat. Her hand brushed his chest, feeling the undead heart that beat only for the hunt. The touch ignited sparks, the bond demanding more, a forbidden hunger that mirrored his own. He pressed her against the cool marble, his body a cage of muscle and shadow. "You test me. Sulla's will is absolute." But his voice cracked, the conflict raging. Loyalty to his sire, the vampire who had turned him centuries ago, warred with this new tether to her, to Targus reborn, to a love that could unmake empires. Quintus's voice cut through from afar. "General," another mark sighted, near the temple of Vesta. Marius released her, but not before his lips grazed her ear, a promise and a warning. "This mercy will cost us both." The words sent a thrill through her, equal parts fear and desire. The next hunt was brutal. The target, a grizzled veteran of Marius's own namesake wars, irony not lost on the vampire general, fought like a demon. He wielded a pilum with desperate skill, skewering one of the squad before Quintus buried his blade in the man's gut. Blood sprayed, warm and vital, and Marius's control frayed. He fed briefly, fangs sinking into the dying warrior's neck, the act both sustenance and sacrament. Dacia watched, transfixed. The sight of him, primal and vulnerable, deepened the ache in her core. Their bond amplified it, visions flashing of tangled limbs and shared blood, a union that defied slave and master. As the purge waned, the forum fell quieter, save for the moans of the wounded and the crackle of torches. Bodies littered the ground, a grim harvest. Quintus wiped his blade on a corpse's tunic, eyeing Dacia with open distrust. "Your divinations spared that rat. If I find you've crossed us—" Marius silenced him with a glare. "The haruspex serves Sulla, as do we all." But inwardly, doubt gnawed. Dacia's intervention had spared a life, but at what risk? Whispers of rebellion could reach Sulla's ears, and the dictator's wrath was eternal. They returned to the center, where the proscription tablets stood like sentinels. Dacia traced a name with her finger. Cassius the Younger, spared earlier by her subtler arts. The moral victory tasted bittersweet amid the violence. As dawn's first light crept over the Capitoline hill, Marius dismissed the squad. Quintus departed with a final scowl, but Marius lingered, drawing Dacia into the shadow of the Basilica Julia. "Why?" he demanded softly, his hand cupping her chin, forcing her gaze to his. "Because not all blood spilled builds an empire," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Some must be spared to remind us of what we've lost." The bond surged, pulling them into a kiss. Fierce, blood-tainted, a clash of wills and wants. His fangs nicked her lip, drawing a bead of divine blood that he lapped with a groan, the essence flooding him with visions of furrows and rebirth. She pulled back, breathless. "Choose, Marius. Sulla's chains or the old god's freedom." He released her, conflict etching lines on his ageless face. "The night is not over, Dacia, nor is our path." As they slipped into the pre-dawn mist, the forum lay silent, but the seeds of discord had taken root, promising a harvest of blood and fire. Chapter 7. Hunters in the Dark. The first screams shattered the pre-dawn hush of Villa Sanguinaria like brittle bone. Dacia jolted awake in her chamber, the silk sheets tangling around her limbs as if to hold her from the nightmare spilling into reality. The bond with Marius thrummed urgently in her veins, a staccato pulse that dragged her upright, heart pounding in sync with distant cries. Outside, the air filled with the wet rip of flesh and the guttural snarls of the undead. Vampires, not the disciplined enforcers of Sulla, but feral packs driven by something darker, hungrier. She threw on a woolen cloak over her shift, the fabric rough against her skin, and snatched the small dagger from her bedside, a gift from Aradia, etched with Etruscan runes that hummed faintly now, as if sensing the blood to come. The villa, once a sanctuary of marble and shadowed luxury, erupted into chaos. Servants fled through corridors lit by overturned braziers, their flames licking at tapestries like eager tongues. Dacia's bare feet slapped against cool tile as she ran toward the atrium, the bond pulling her inexorably to Marius. He was already there, a whirlwind of lethal grace amid the fray. His gladius sang through the air, severing a coven attacker's head in a spray of ichor black blood. The intruder crumpled, his body twitching as the light of unlife fled his eyes. More poured in from the garden arches, pale faces twisted in savage hunger, eyes glowing with the crimson fire of old bloodlines. These were not Sulla's turned. They were remnants of the ancient covens, the ones who whispered of the old gods and despised the Roman yoke. "Marius!" Dacia's voice cut through the din, raw with fear and command. He whirled, his gaze locking on her, relief and fury warring in those immortal depths. "To me!" he bellowed, slashing another assailant across the throat. The vampire gurgled, claws raking futilely at the air before collapsing. But the numbers swelled. From the shadows of the peristyle, a figure emerged. Fausta Cornelia, her raven hair unbound like a banner of night, lips curled in a predator's smile. She was Sulla's rival in the vampire courts, a matron of the old Italic lines who craved the divine blood awakening in Dacia. "The prophetess," Fausta purred, her voice silk over steel. "Taja's vessel. Come, child. Your blood will quench the thirst of empires long dry." Her coven flanked her, a dozen strong, their forms blurring with preternatural speed. Marius positioned himself between Dacia and the onslaught, his body a shield of corded muscle and unyielding will. "You'll not touch her," he growled, fangs bared, the bond flaring hot between them like molten iron. Dacia felt it, his rage, his protectiveness, laced with the undercurrent of desire that never fully slept. But even he couldn't hold against so many. A coven brute lunged past him, claws extended for Dacia's throat. She dodged, the dagger flashing in her hand, slicing a shallow gash across the attacker's arm. Black blood welled, sizzling on the stone, and the vampire howled, recoiling as if burned by divine fire. The runes on her blade glowed brighter, a whisper of her emerging godhood repelling the profane. But Fausta laughed, a sound like shattering crystal, and gestured. 2 more vampires swarmed Marius, pinning his arms as their fangs sought his neck, not to kill, but to weaken, to claim. "They hunt you, Dacia," Marius roared, twisting free with a burst of strength that snapped bones. He impaled one on his gladius, the blade emerging from the attacker's back in a fountain of gore. "The catacombs! Flee!" The villa's secret passages, honeycombed beneath the foundations, led to the ancient warrens of Rome's underbelly. It was their only chance. Dacia nodded, terror clawing her throat, but the bond steadied her. She backed toward the alcove where the hidden door lay, her free hand tracing the concealed latch. Fausta advanced, elegant in her blood-red stola, eyes fixed on Dacia like a hawk on prey. "Run if you must, little goddess, but the earth remembers its furrows. Your blood will plow them anew. For us." The door groaned open on rusted hinges, revealing a yawning blackness that smelled of damp stone and forgotten centuries. Dacia plunged in, Marius disengaging with a final savage strike that felled another foe. He followed, slamming the panel shut behind them, the thud echoing like a tomb ceiling. But the pursuit was immediate, clawing at the wood, snarls filtering through the cracks. They descended the spiral stair in darkness, the bond their only light, a psychic tether that painted faint outlines in Dacia's mind. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the air growing colder, heavier, as they emerged into the catacombs of the first turning. These were no mere burial grounds. They were the veins of ancient Rome, carved in the era when Etruscan blood gods walked the earth, before the Republic's steel eclipsed their mysteries. Torchless, they navigated by touch and instinct, Marius's vampiric senses guiding them through twisting tunnels lined with niches holding dusty ossuaries. "Fausta's coven," Marius murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the bond. "They seek your divinity to overthrow Sulla. The old bloodlines hunger for Tejas' return, not for freedom, but for dominion." His hand found hers in the gloom, fingers intertwining with a grip that was both anchor and claim. The touch ignited sparks, the bond thrumming with shared adrenaline, fear sharpening the edges of their forbidden pull. Dacia squeezed back, her pulse racing. "And you? What do you hunger for?" The question hung, laced with challenge and the memory of their kiss in the forum's shadows. But there was no time for answers. Behind them, the grate of stone announced the breach. Fausta's hunters had forced the door. They ran, the catacombs unfolding like a labyrinth of nightmares. Passages branched into voids, the air thick with the musty scent of earth and decay. Dacia's lungs burned, her shift clinging damply to her skin, but the bond fueled her, Marius's strength bleeding into her veins. They turned a corner into a wider chamber, where biers lined the walls, skeletal remains grinning in the faint phosphorescence of lichen. A snarl echoed from the pursuit, closing fast. Marius shoved Dacia behind a crumbling pillar, whirling to meet the first attacker. The vampire barreled into him, fangs snapping, but Marius was the elder, his blows landing with crushing force. He grappled the foe to the ground, gladius forgotten in the frenzy, hands wrenching the head until a sickening crack echoed. The body went limp, but more came. 3, 4, shadows detaching from the walls. Dacia pressed against the stone, heart hammering, watching Marius fight like a demon unchained. Blood, his own and theirs, smeared his face, accentuating the sharp planes of his cheeks, the feral gleam in his eyes. The sight stirred something primal in her, the godhood uncoiling in her blood, whispering of power and union. But fear dominated. These hunters were relentless, driven by Fausta's command. One broke through, lunging for her. Dacia slashed with the dagger, the blade biting deep into the vampire's shoulder. It shrieked, the wound smoking as her divine essence seared the undead flesh. The attacker reeled, but not before its claws raked her arm, drawing hot lines of pain. Blood welled, her blood, rich with Tages's legacy, and the scent drove the others mad. "Mine!" Fausta's voice sliced through the chaos, emerging from the tunnel like a queen of the damned. She moved with liquid grace, dispatching one of her own, who strayed too close to the prize. "The plow awaits her blood! Seize her!" Marius roared, tackling Fausta mid-stride. They collided in a blur of limbs and fury, rolling across the dusty floor. Fangs clashed, nails gouged, ancient rivals in a dance as old as their curses. Dacia staggered back, clutching her wounded arm, the bond flooding her with Marius's pain and rage. She had to act. Her eyes fell on a side passage, narrower, leading deeper. Visions flickered unbidden. Furrows in earth, a plough of bronze and bone, Tages's hand guiding it through fields of blood and prophecy. The plough of Tages, it called to her, a relic buried here since the first turning of the world, when gods walked as men. "Marius! This way!" She darted into the fissure, the walls scraping her shoulders. He broke free from Fausta with a guttural curse, following as her hunters swarmed. The tunnel narrowed to a crawl, forcing them to belly along like worms in the earth's gut. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, muffled by stone, but Dacia knew it was temporary. They emerged into a vast cavern, the air stale and sacred. In the center, on a pedestal of weathered alabaster, lay the plough of Tages. It was no farmer's tool, but a ceremonial artifact. A curved blade of meteoric iron, haft wrapped in etched leather depicting entrails and stars, its share crusted with ancient darkened blood. Runes glowed faintly along its length, responding to Dacia's presence like a heartbeat. She approached, transfixed, the bond humming in resonance. It's the key," she whispered, reaching out. Her fingers brushed the haft, and power surged, visions cascading, ploughed fields birthing empires, blood furrows seeding gods, her own face superimposed on Tages's ancient visage. Marius staggered to her side, wounds knitting slowly from the skirmish, his breath ragged. "Dacia, it's drawing them! We must—" But Fausta burst into the chamber, her coven at her heels, eyes alight with triumph. "You found it," Fausta hissed, circling like a wolf. "The plough that birthed the blood gods. With your essence, we can unmake Sulla's false order." Her hunters fanned out, cutting off escape, their forms hulking in the dim glow of the relic. Dacia gripped the plough, lifting it with surprising ease. It was heavy, yet it thrummed in her hands, amplifying her divinity. She swung it experimentally, the blade whistling through air, trailing ethereal light. "This is not for you," she declared, voice echoing with otherworldly timbre. The god within rose, her eyes flashing gold. The battle erupted anew. Marius charged Fausta, their clash a tempest of claws and curses. Dacia wielded the plough like a scythe, its edge cleaving through vampire flesh with divine fury. One hunter lunged. She parried, the blade sinking into his chest, unraveling him from within, flesh dissolving into ash as Tages's power rejected the profane. Another came from behind. She spun, the haft cracking against skull, bone shattering like dry clay. But they were outnumbered. A coven brute tackled her, pinning her to the ground, fangs inches from her throat. The bond screamed, Marius's fury peaking as he fought to reach her. Fausta's laughter rang out, her hand clamping on his shoulder, nails drawing blood. "She dies, and your bond shatters, Enforcer. Sulla's pet. Broken." Desperation clawed Dacia's chest. The plough lay beside her, humming. She seized it, driving the share into the attacker's side. Light exploded, a burst of golden energy that consumed the vampire in flames, the scent of charred flesh filling the cavern. The shockwave hurled others back, buying precious seconds. Marius broke free, scooping Dacia up, the plow in her grasp. The far tunnel, now! They bolted, Fausta's enraged shriek pursuing them. The catacombs twisted onward, a maze of despair, but the plow's power guided Dacia, illuminating paths in her mind. They ran until exhaustion claimed them, collapsing in a forgotten alcove deep within the stone. The sounds of pursuit had faded, lost in the labyrinth's embrace. Marius pulled Dacia close, his body trembling from wounds and exertion. "You're bleeding," he murmured, fangs grazing her neck as he licked the gashes on her arm, his saliva sealing them with a sting that bordered on ecstasy. The bond ignited, raw and insistent, the terror of the chase transmuting into something fiercer. Dacia arched against him, the plow set aside, her hands roaming his bloodied tunic, tearing it open to reveal the sculpted planes of his chest. "I thought we were lost," she gasped, fingers tracing scars that told centuries of war. "Never," he growled, capturing her mouth in a kiss that tasted of blood and survival. His hands slid under her shift, calloused palms igniting her skin, cupping her breasts with possessive hunger. The alcove's chill faded under their heat, the bond weaving their sensations. His ache mirroring her throb, desire coiling tight. She straddled him, grinding against the hard length of his arousal, the friction drawing moans from them both. "Take me," she demanded, nipping his lip, drawing his blood. Divine tinged now from their proximity. He thrust upward, burying himself inside her with a groan that echoed off the stones, filling her completely. Their joining was desperate, primal, bodies slamming together in the rhythm of the hunted, each thrust a defiance of death. Marius's hands gripped her hips, guiding her, his fangs scraping her shoulder without breaking skin, teasing the edge of pain and pleasure. Dacia rode him hard, the plow's residual power pulsing through her, heightening every sensation until climax crashed over them like a wave, their cries muffled against each other's flesh. In the afterglow spent and entwined, the bond solidified, threads of loyalty and love weaving unbreakable. "The plow changes everything," Dacia whispered, her head on his chest feeling the faint echo of his undead heart. "We can fight them now. All of them." Marius stroked her hair, resolve hardening in his voice. "Sulla, the covens. None will chain us. But the hunters will come again." As they gathered strength in the dark, the catacombs whispered of trials ahead. But for the first time, hope flickered amid the terror. A furrow plowed for rebirth, not ruin. Chapter 8. Echoes of Divinity. The subterranean temple of Purges pulsed with an ancient heartbeat, its walls a labyrinth of shadowed stone etched with faded frescoes of plowed earth and spilling entrails. Torchlight flickered uncertainly, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the altar. A massive plow blade hewn from obsidian-veined marble, its edge dulled by centuries of forgotten rituals. Dacia Corvinus knelt beside it, her breath ragged, the metallic tang of blood still thick in the air from their desperate flight through the catacombs. The plow of Purges lay nearby, wrapped in tattered cloth, its presence a silent promise of power and peril. Marius Sanguis slumped against the altar's base, his immortal frame racked by wounds that would fell a mortal man 10 times over. Silver-tipped arrows from the coven hunters protruded from his shoulder and thigh, their poison seeping into his veins like liquid fire. His skin, usually pale as moonlit marble, was ashen, slick with sweat and ichor. He gripped the edge of the stone, knuckles white, his fangs bared in a grimace that was half pain, half defiance. "Leave me," he growled through clenched teeth, his voice a gravelly rasp. "The bond will sustain you. Get to Aradia. She'll know a way out." Dacia's hands trembled as she tore at the laces of his tunic, exposing the ravaged flesh. The bond between them thrummed in her blood, an insistent pull that made her heart ache with his agony. She was no healer, only a slave trained in the grim art of reading death in guts and gore. But something deeper stirred within her now, awakened by the ritual in the catacombs, whispers of divinity echoing in her veins like the distant rumble of thunder. "I won't leave you to rot like some forgotten proscript," she snapped, her Dacian accent sharpening her words like a blade. "Not after everything." From the shadowed alcove beyond the altar, Aradia emerged like a wraith from the mist. The ancient Etruscan vampire moved with the fluid grace of one who had danced with gods long before Rome's boot crushed their altars. Her eyes, dark pools rimmed with kohl, gleamed with a mix of sorrow and fierce resolve. She was clad in a simple stola dyed the color of dried blood, her silver hair braided with bones, talismans from rituals older than the Republic itself. "The child of the furrow awakens," she murmured, her voice a silken thread woven with power. "Purges stirs in your blood, girl. But to heal him, you must embrace what Rome buried." Dacia glanced up, her tattooed arms, marked with prophetic ravens and coiling serpents, glistening with sweat. Aradia had been their guide through the catacombs, her knowledge of the old ways the only thread keeping them from the hunter's fangs. Now, she knelt beside them, her cool fingers tracing the wounds on Marius's body. He hissed at her touch, but there was no real protest. Even in his torment, he trusted the keeper of the ancient rites. "The poison is Etruscan silver forged in the first wars," Aradia explained, her tone clinical, yet laced with urgency. "It binds the blood, starves the immortal. Only divine essence can burn it clean." Marius's laugh was bitter, choked. "Divine? I'm Sulla's dog, Aradia. No god would waste breath on me." His eyes, stormy grey flecked with crimson, met Dacia's. In them, she saw the weight of 8 centuries, the fall of kings, the rise of empires, the endless thirst that had twisted him into a monster. Yet beneath it, a flicker of something human, something that had ignited in the heat of their bond. Dacia's resolve hardened. She had fled the gold mines of Dacia, endured the slave markets, read fates in the steaming entrails of the condemned. If Tages lived in her, then let it rise. "Tell me what to do," she said to Aradia, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. Aradia nodded, rising to fetch a chalice from a niche in the wall, carved bone, etched with runes that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. She sliced her palm with a small obsidian knife, letting her blood drip into the vessel until it swirled like dark wine. "The ritual of the furrow," she intoned. "Blood calls to blood, earth to divine. You must drink of me, child, and offer yours to him. Let the god flow through you." Dacia hesitated, the chalice cold against her lips. Vampire blood, cursed nectar that could enslave or elevate. But for Marius, she would risk the madness. She drank, the metallic richness flooding her mouth, igniting her senses like wildfire. Visions flashed, plowed fields under stormy skies, a child emerging from the soil, eyes blazing with prophecy. Purges. Her body arched, power surging through her limbs, her skin glowing faintly with an inner light. Now, it was Marius's turn. Dacia pressed the chalice to his lips, but he turned away. "No. I won't bind you further. The bond is chain enough." "Stubborn fool," Dacia whispered, fury and affection twisting in her chest. She bit her own wrist, the pain sharp and immediate, and forced the wound to his mouth. "Drink, or die here like a coward." His resistance crumbled under the scent of her blood. Divine, potent, laced with the essence of the old gods. He latched on, fangs piercing flesh, drawing deep. The temple seemed to hold its breath as the ritual unfolded. Dacia felt the godhood uncoil within her, a serpent of light and shadow weaving through the bond to Marius. His wounds bubbled, silver poison hissing as it was expelled, flesh knitting with unnatural speed. But the healing was more than mending. It was intimacy forged in blood and fire. As the power flowed, their minds touched, flashes of memory, desire, pain. Dacia saw Marius's turning, the Etruscan wars where Rome's founders had ploughed under the blood gods, binding them in catacombs like this one. He saw her enslavement, the gold mines where she first read a miner's guts and foresaw her path to Rome. And deeper still, the hunger they shared. Not just for blood, but for redemption. For a world untainted by Sulla's endless purges. Marius released her wrist with a shudder, his wounds sealed, color returning to his face. He pulled her close, their bodies pressing together on the cold stone floor. The bond thrummed, electric, demanding more. "What have you done?" he murmured, his breath hot against her neck, fangs grazing her skin without breaking it. "Embraced what I am," Dacia replied, her hands tangling in his dark hair. The partial godhood lingered, a warm ember in her core, sharpening her senses, heightening every touch. She could feel the temple's ancient pulse syncing with her own heartbeat, the frescoes whispering secrets of haruspicy and fate-weaving. Aradia watched from the shadows, a faint smile on her lips. The alliance is sealed. But Sulla's suspicion grows like a shadow over the forum. He senses the shift in the bloodlines. Marius rose, pulling Dacia with him, his strength renewed. They stood before the altar, the plough of Tages between them like a vow. "I've served him for decades," he said, voice low and resolute. "Enforced his lists, spilled blood for his glory. But you've shown me the chains I wear. No more." Dacia's heart swelled, hope flickering amid the darkness. "Then we resist. Rewrite the fates. Save those the proscriptions doom. With Tages's power, we can turn the tide." Aradia stepped forward, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "The old ways return through you. But beware. The plough cuts both ways. To wield it against Sulla is to invite the full wrath of the covens." Their pact formed in whispers and shared glances, a commitment born of blood and burgeoning love. Marius's hand found Dacia's, fingers interlacing, the bond a bridge between slave and enforcer, mortal and immortal. For the first time, the temple felt less like a tomb and more like a cradle of rebirth. Hours passed in hushed planning, Aradia sketching maps of the catacombs' secret exits, Dacia practicing minor divinations on scraps of bone, Marius recounting the weaknesses in Sulla's guard rotations. The air grew thick with possibility, the torch flames burning brighter, as if feeding on their resolve. Yet hope was fragile in Rome's underbelly. As dawn's faint light filtered through cracks in the stone above, a distant clamor echoed through the tunnels, boots on stone, the murmur of voices. Aradia's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "They've found us!" Marius tensed, hand drifting to the hilt of his gladius. Quintus's men? Or worse? Before Aradia could respond, a figure emerged from the gloom, not a hunter but a messenger, cloaked in the black of Sulla's lictors. He was mortal. Young, his face pale with fear, bearing a sealed scroll emblazoned with the dictator's fasces. "General Sanguis," he stammered, bowing low. "The dictator summons you, immediately, to the Curia. He knows of the disturbance in the catacombs, and he demands the haruspex." Dacia's blood ran cold, the ember of godhood flaring in warning. Sulla's summons was no mere order, it was a noose tightening. Marius took the scroll, breaking the seal with a crack that echoed like breaking bone. His face darkened as he read, the weight of impending confrontation settling over them like a shroud. The messenger shifted uneasily. He said, "If you do not come, the proscription lists will double by nightfall." Aradia's laugh was soft, bitter. "The game begins anew." Marius met Dacia's gaze, the bond pulsing with unspoken resolve. Whatever awaited in the Senate House, they would face it together, not as servant and master, but as allies in the shadows of divinity. Chapter 9. The Bond's Price. The Villa Sanguinaria loomed like a sentinel in the moonless night, its marble facade scarred by the faint glow of distant fires that licked the Roman skyline. The purges had intensified since Sulla's iron grip tightened further, proscription lists swelling like bloated corpses in the Tiber. Screams echoed from the city below, carried on the chill wind that whipped through the olive groves surrounding the estate. Dacia Corvinus clung to the shadows as Marius guided her through the hidden postern gate, his hand firm on her elbow, the bond between them a living wire humming with urgency. They had evaded the immediate summons from Sulla by a threadbare lie, claiming the catacomb disturbance was mere banditry. Nothing more. Aradia had remained behind in the temple, her ancient wisdom a shield against prying eyes, but the weight of the dictator's demand hung over them like a headsman's axe. Marius's face was a mask of controlled fury as he barred the gate behind them, his grey eyes scanning the darkened courtyard. "We have until dawn," he murmured, his voice low and edged with gravel. "Then we face him. But tonight is ours." Dacia's heart pounded, not just from the flight, but from the insistent pull in her veins. The healing ritual in the temple had woven their essences tighter. Tigress's divinity now a constant ember in her blood, feeding the bond's hunger. She could feel Marius's thirst as her own, his ancient weariness seeping into her bones. The villa's interior swallowed them whole, its halls lit by sputtering oil lamps that cast elongated shadows on frescoes of victorious legions and spilled entrails, reminders of Marius's dual life as enforcer and reluctant rebel. They moved in silence to his private chambers, a sanctuary high in the villa's eastern wing, overlooking the smoldering city. The room was austere, yet opulent. A wide bed draped in silks the color of fresh blood, a bronze brazier crackling with scented woods, and walls adorned with Etruscan relics, fragments of plows and prophetic tablets that Aradia had smuggled from forgotten tombs. Dacia paused at the threshold, her simple tunic clinging to her sweat-dampened skin, the tattoos on her arms seeming to writhe in the firelight. "What if he suspects us already?" she whispered, her Dacian lilt sharpening the fear. "The summons. It's a trap, isn't it?" Marius turned to her, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, the tunic he wore doing little to hide the corded muscles beneath, marks of a warrior immortalized by blood and blade. He cupped her face, thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, his touch igniting sparks along the bond. "Sulla suspects everything and everyone. But he needs me. His blade in the dark. And you. You're the key to fates he can't divine alone." His eyes darkened, crimson flecks swirling in the grey. "But here now. Let the world burn. Let me have you." "Ma." The words hung between them, heavy with the forbidden. Dacia had been slave, prophetess, now something more. A goddess stirring in mortal flesh. Yet in his gaze she saw not worship but raw need, the kind that bridged immortal and divine. She rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his, tentative at first, then fierce as the bond surged. His mouth was cool, tasting of iron and ancient wine, his fangs grazing her lower lip just enough to draw a bead of blood. Marius groaned, the sound vibrating through her, and pulled her inside, kicking the door shut. The world narrowed to the heat building between them, the purge's distant clamor fading under the roar of her pulse. He backed her against the wall, hands roaming her body with possessive urgency, bunching the fabric of her tunic until it tore at the shoulder. "Gods, Dacia," he breathed against her neck, inhaling her scent, earth and prophecy, laced with the divine tang that drove him mad. "You've ruined me for anything else." She arched into him, fingers digging into his hair, pulling him closer. The bond amplified every sensation. His hands on her breasts, thumbs circling nipples that hardened under his touch. The press of his arousal against her thigh, hard and insistent. Dacia gasped as he lifted her, legs wrapping around his waist instinctively, the cool stone wall a stark contrast to the fire in his kiss. "Then ruin me too," she demanded, nipping at his earlobe, feeling the tremor that ran through his immortal frame. He carried her to the bed, laying her down with a reverence that belied the hunger in his eyes. Silks whispered against her skin as he stripped away the remnants of her tunic, exposing her body to the brazier's glow. Dacia felt exposed, vulnerable, yet empowered. The tattoos across her torso, ravens in flight and furrows of earth, seemed to pulse with inner light. Marius shed his own clothes swiftly, revealing the sculpted perfection of his form. Pale skin, marred only by faint scars from battles long past, his erection straining, veins throbbing with need. He knelt between her legs, eyes locked on hers as he trailed kisses down her throat, over the swell of her breasts, tongue flicking at sensitive peaks until she moaned, hips bucking. The bond thrummed, sharing his pleasure in her responses, making every lick and suck feel doubled. "Tell me what you want," he murmured, voice husky, fingers tracing the inner curve of her thigh, teasing the slick heat gathering there. "You," Dacia panted, her hands guiding his head lower. "All of you. No holding back." The words were a challenge, a surrender. He obliged, mouth descending to her core, tongue delving into her folds with expert precision. She cried out, the sensation electric, the bond flooding her with his own arousal. The taste of her on his lips, the ache to bury himself inside her. Waves of pleasure built as he lapped and sucked, fingers joining to stroke her inner walls, curling just right to hit that spot that made stars burst behind her eyelids. Dacia shattered first, climax crashing over her like a Roman siege, body convulsing as she clutched the sheets. Marius rose, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his fangs fully extended now, eyes wild. He positioned himself at her entrance, pausing to savor the moment, the tip of him nudging her slickness. "The bond. It demands this," he said, voice strained. "But I want it for me. For us." She nodded, pulling him down, their mouths crashing together as he thrust into her, filling her completely. The stretch was exquisite, bordering on pain, but the bond turned it to bliss. They moved together, rhythm primal, his hips snapping against hers with centuries of pent-up longing. Dacia's nails raked his back, drawing blood that welled and healed almost instantly, the scent spurring him faster. He buried his face in her neck, fangs piercing just enough to taste without turning, the pull of her divine blood making him growl. Their coupling was a tempest, sweat-slicked skins sliding, breaths mingling in gasps and moans. Dacia wrapped her legs tighter, meeting each thrust, the bond weaving their sensations into a tapestry of ecstasy. She felt his release building, a coil tightening, and clenched around him, pushing him over the edge. Marius roared, spilling inside her, the warmth triggering her second peak, waves of pleasure rippling through them both, shared and intensified. They collapsed, entwined, the aftershocks fading into languid touches. But as the haze cleared, the bond's darker side emerged. Dacia felt it first, a subtle drain, like roots siphoning from her core. Her limbs grew heavy, the ember of Tages dimming, vitality ebbing into the connection. Marius lifted his head, concern etching his features. "Dacia!" She smiled weakly, tracing his jaw. "It's the price. Your immortality feeds on me now, doesn't it? The godhood sustains us both, but it costs." Visions flickered at the edges of her mind. Flashes of Marius in Sulla's shadow, a choice looming, betrayal's bitter taste. He cursed softly, pulling her closer, as if to shield her from the truth. "I won't let it consume you. We'll find a way." But even as he spoke, a knock echoed at the door, sharp, insistent. A servant's voice filtered through, trembling. "Dominus, a message from the Curia. Urgent, the dictator. He knows of the Haruspex's divinations, and there's word of a coven spy in the villa." Marius's body tensed against hers, the bond carrying his anguish like a storm. Betrayal's shadow loomed, not just from without, but perhaps from within. The cost of their love, a blade poised to cut deepest. Chapter 10. Fates Entwined. The Curia Julia stood as a monument to Rome's unyielding ambition, its marble columns rising like the spines of ancient beasts under the pallid dawn light. Smoke from the night's purges still curled through the air, carrying the acrid scent of charred flesh and desperation. Dacia Corvinus followed Marius Sanguis through the grand portico, her pulse a frantic drumbeat echoing the bond that thrummed between them. The villa's stolen night lingered in her body, a sweet ache between her thighs, the faint marks of his fangs on her neck hidden beneath a high-collared stola borrowed from Aradia. But the message had shattered their fragile peace. Sulla knew of her divinations, and whispers of a spy slithered through the villa's corridors like venomous serpents. Marius's stride was purposeful, his gladius sheathed at his side, the enforcer's mask firmly in place. Yet through the bond, Dacia felt the storm raging beneath. Fury at the intrusion, fear for her safety, and that insatiable hunger that now drained her with every shared breath. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. "Cassius awaits us. He's marked on the list, but claims loyalty to the old ways. Perhaps an ally, if we tread carefully." The interior of the Senate House was a labyrinth of shadowed alcoves and echoing chambers, the air thick with incense to mask the bloodstains on the floor. Senators and their retinues moved like ghosts, eyes darting, voices hushed. Proscriptions had turned allies into prey, and every glance could be a death sentence. Marius led her to a side chamber off the main hall, where marble reliefs depicted victorious legions trampling barbarian hordes, ironic, given Dacia's Dacian roots. Cassius the Younger paced the room, his youthful face etched with the strain of sleepless nights. Tall and lean, with the patrician features of his noble line, he wore a simple toga edged in mourning purple, his dark hair disheveled. He stopped at their entrance, relief flickering in his hazel eyes. "Marius, you came. And this is the haruspex, the one who reads fates in the guts of the damned?" Dacia met his gaze steadily, the prophetic fire in her veins stirring at the scent of his fierce sweat. "Dacia Corvinus," she said, her accent a soft blade cutting through the Latin. "And yes, I read what others fear to see." The bond with Marius pulsed, amplifying her senses. She could taste Cassius's uncertainty, the undercurrent of rebellion simmering beneath his facade. Marius clasped forearms with Cassius, a warrior's greeting. The summons was clear. Interpret the entrails for the next list. But Sulla's spies are everywhere. What do you seek from us? Cassius glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. Alliance. The proscriptions devour the Republic's heart. My family is next, marked for their ties to Marius's old rivals. But I've seen your work, Marius, and heard of her visions. He nodded to Dacia. If we subvert from within, alter the fates just enough, we could turn the tide. Before Marius could respond, the chamber doors swung open with a groan. A herald in Sulla's crimson livery entered, flanked by 2 Praetorian guards, their spears glinting. The dictator Felix demands the divination now, in the inner sanctum. His eyes lingered on Dacia, cold and appraising, as if weighing her worth in blood. The inner sanctum was a vaulted chamber at the Curia's heart, lit by shafts of light piercing narrow windows high above. A stone altar dominated the center, stained dark from centuries of offerings, animal, human, perhaps more in the Republic's shadowed days. Sulla himself lounged on a curule chair at the far end, his leonine face framed by the white hair of age, but his eyes burned with vampiric vigor. Flanking him were courtiers, including the sleek form of Fausta Cornelia, her lips curled in a predatory smile. The air hummed with tension, the bond between Dacia and Marius tightening like a noose. Ah, the Dacian seer, Sulla drawled, his voice carrying the weight of command. Marius, you vouch for her skills? The lists grow long. I need certainty in the entrails. He gestured to a silver basin beside the altar, brimming with the steaming viscera of a freshly sacrificed bull. Heart, liver, intestines coiled like serpents. Dacia approached, her bare feet silent on the cold mosaic floor depicting Tages ploughing the primordial earth. The irony twisted in her gut. She was his vessel, yet here to serve Rome's butcher. Marius stood at her side, a silent sentinel, his presence a balm against the predatory stares. Cassius hovered at the periphery, invited as a witness to his own potential fate. She dipped her hands into the basin, the warm blood slicking her skin, and closed her eyes. The bond with Marius ignited, drawing his immortal strength into her, but exacting its toll. A faint dizziness, her vision blurring at the edges. Whispers of Tages filled her mind, ancient Etruscan tongues weaving prophecies of furrows sown in flesh, empires rising and crumbling in rivers of blood. The visions crashed over her like a tidal wave. First, the forum awash in crimson, bodies piled high as proscriptions turned to civil war. Then, broader. Legions marching north, not to Dacia, but beyond, into misty lands where vampire kings stirred in barrows. Rome's eagles clashed with draconic banners, blood gods awakening in the frozen wastes. And at the center, she and Marius, entwined not just in body but in fate. His choice: stand with Sulla's eternal Rome, or shatter it for a new order, her divinity the plough that furrowed the old world's end. A gasp escaped her lips, the entrails slipping from her fingers. She staggered, Marius's arm catching her waist, pulling her against him. The contact sparked heat through the bond, his concern mingling with desire, even here. "Dacia," he whispered, fangs grazing her ear unseen. Sulla leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What do you see, girl?" "Speak." She straightened, drawing on the god's resolve, her voice echoing unnaturally in the chamber. "Wars beyond wars, dictator. The lists you scribe will birth not obedience but rebellion. Northward shadows rise, vampire lords unchained, allying with forgotten gods. Rome's blood will flow, but not as you command. Fates entwine. The enforcer's blade turns, the prophetess ploughs new fields." Her gaze locked on Marius, the prophecy binding them visibly, a shimmer in the air like heat haze. Fausta hissed, rising. "Blasphemy! She's Tages' whore, twisting omens to save her kind." Chaos erupted, guards advancing, courtiers murmuring. Cassius stepped forward, voice steady. "Wait. The vision speaks truth. I've seen the northern stirrings in dispatches. If we blind ourselves to this, Rome falls harder." Marius's hand tightened on his gladius, positioning himself between Dacia and the guards. The bond surged, her vision's power flowing into him, sharpening his senses. "She speaks for the gods, Sulla. Ignore at your peril." Sulla's laughter boomed, but his eyes were calculating, the vampire in him, recognizing the divine spark. "Bold words, but useful. Guard her closely, Marius. And you, Cassius, your name stays off the list. For now, prove your loyalty." He waved them out. The audience ended, but the threat lingered. They retreated to an antechamber, hearts pounding. Cassius barred the door, turning to them with fierce determination. "That was no mere reading. You bound something. I felt it. Alliance now, or we're all proscribed." Dacia nodded, the visions after images fading, but the binding to Marius solidified, their souls threaded like veins. "The wars come. We subvert the lists, save the innocent, weaken Sulla from within. Cassius, your networks in the Senate, use them. Marius, your enforcers, I'll divine the paths." Marius pulled her close, his mouth claiming hers in a fierce kiss, heedless of Cassius's presence. The bond demanded it, passion flaring amid the danger. Cassius averted his eyes, but the air thickened with erotic tension. Agreed, Marius growled against her lips, hands sliding down her back, pressing her hips to his growing arousal. But first, we seal this. The antechamber's shadows enveloped them, an alcove curtained by heavy drapes offering scant privacy. Dacia's breath hitched as Marius backed her against the wall, his body a shield and aflame. "Not here," she whispered, even as her fingers tangled in his tunic, pulling him nearer. The risk heightened everything. The distant echoes of the Senate, Cassius's watchful silence. "Yes, here," Marius insisted, his voice rough with need. He hiked her stola, fingers finding her bare beneath, slick from the bond's insistent pull. She moaned softly, biting her lip to stifle it, as he stroked her folds, thumbs circling the sensitive nub. The vision's energy coursed through them, turning prophecy into primal urge. Cassius cleared his throat. "I'll stand guard." But his voice held a note of intrigue, the alliance forging in more than words. Marius thrust 2 fingers inside her, curling them, his mouth silencing her cry with another kiss. Dacia rocked against his hand, the stone cool against her heated skin, pleasure coiling tight. "Marius." "Gods," she gasped, nails digging into his shoulders. He withdrew, freeing himself swiftly, lifting her leg to hook around his waist. He entered her in one smooth thrust, filling her deeply, the bond amplifying every inch, every pulse. They moved urgently, hips grinding, his free hand kneading her breast through the fabric. Sweat beaded on their skin, breaths ragged. Dacia clenched around him, chasing release, the erotic charge of their binding fate pushing her over. She came with a muffled whimper, waves crashing, triggering his own climax, hot seed spilling as he buried his face in her neck, fangs nicking without breaking skin. They stilled, foreheads touching, the afterglow a brief armor against the ominous future. Cassius's voice broke the haze. "The decision is made. We begin tonight. Alter the next list. Recruit more." Marius withdrew gently, adjusting her stola, his eyes promising more. "From within, we subvert. For Rome's true blood, not Sulla's tyranny." Dacia felt the gods stir, ready to plow the furrows of change, her fate entwined with theirs, wars looming on the horizon. But as they slipped from the curia, a shadow detached from the columns, Fausta's spy, eyes gleaming with malice. The alliance formed, but the hunt had just begun, setting the Empire's veins aflame for battles yet to come. Chapter 11. Seeds of Rebellion. The air in the catacombs of the first turning hung thick and stale, laced with the metallic tang of ancient blood and the musty rot of bones long forgotten. Torchlight flickered against the rough-hewn walls, casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres from Rome's primordial sins. Dacia Corvinus moved with the grace of a shadow herself, her bare feet silent on the uneven stone floor, the hem of her simple woolen tunic brushing against her calves. Beside her, Marius Sanguis glided like a predator in his element, his dark cloak blending seamlessly with the gloom. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his gladius, ever vigilant, for these tunnels were as much a sanctuary as a grave. They had come here under the cover of a moonless night, slipping past the forum's watchful eyes and the villa's guarded gates. The catacombs, labyrinthine veins beneath the eternal city, held secrets older than the Republic itself. Whispers of the first vampires, born from Etruscan rites twisted by Roman ambition. It was here, in Chapter 7, that they had first fled the coven ambush, discovering the plough of Tages amid the ossuary's horrors. Now, they returned not in desperation, but with purpose, to sow the seeds of rebellion. Cassius the Younger waited in an alcove deeper within, his form huddled against a niche carved with faded frescoes of ploughed earth and emergent gods. He was a ghost of the man Dacia had glimpsed in the forum's chaos. A senator's son, marked for death on Sulla's lists, his once fine toga reduced to rags, his face gaunt from weeks in hiding. When Dacia and Marius approached, he straightened, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and terror. "Dacia," he breathed, his voice echoing softly off the walls. "You came. I thought the shadows had claimed you after the Senate House vision." Dacia offered a faint smile, though her heart pounded with the weight of what she was about to propose. "The shadows serve us now, Cassius, and they whisper of change. Sit. We haven't much time." Marius scanned the tunnel's mouth, his vampire senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. The bond between him and Dacia thrummed in his veins, a constant reminder of their shared blood, her divine essence awakening something long dormant in his undead soul. He nodded to Cassius, a gesture of wary trust. "Quintus's patrols scour the Undercity tonight. Sulla grows restless. The lists shorten, but the hunts intensify. Speak quickly, or not at all." They settled on the cold stone, a crude circle formed by the dim light of a single oil lamp. Dacia's tattoos, the prophetic symbols inked across her arms and back from her Dacian days, seemed to pulse faintly in the low light, as if the old gods stirred within her skin. She leaned forward, her dark hair falling like a veil over her shoulders. "You've seen the Forum," she began, her voice low and urgent, carrying the lilt of her conquered homeland. "The blood in the gutters, the names etched in marble like curses. Sulla's proscriptions aren't justice, they're a feast for his kind. Vampires cloaked in senatorial robes, feeding on the Republic's corpse. I was brought to read entrails, to divine who lives and who dies. But the gods, they showed me more. They showed me you, Cassius, as a spark in the dark." Cassius's jaw tightened, his fingers clenching into fists. "I've lost everything. My father beheaded, my home seized. I hide like a rat waiting for the blade. What can I do? I'm no warrior." Marius's laugh was a low rumble, devoid of humor. "Wars aren't won by swords alone, boy. The Senate whispers of populares ideals, of a Rome for the people, not the blood drinkers. You've the ear of those who still cling to the old ways." Dacia reached out, placing a hand on Cassius's arm. Her touch was warm, alive, a stark contrast to Marius's cool grasp. Through the bond, she felt Marius's gaze on her, possessive and heated, even in this grim council. "The vision in the Curia bound our fates," she continued. "Tages, the god plowed from the earth, speaks through me now. He foretells a rebellion, not of armies, but of secrets. Rewrite the lists from within, save the marked, turn the covens against each other. But we need voices like yours, Cassius. Join us. Plant the seeds." Cassius's eyes darted between them, weighing the peril. "And Marius? Sulla's enforcer? How do I trust the wolf in the fold?" Marius's eyes flashed crimson in the lamplight, his fangs subtly elongating, a reflex of irritation. "My loyalty was to survival once, to the sire who turned me 8 centuries ago. But Dacia's blood, it calls to the old oaths, the Etruscan rites Sulla perverts. I've killed for him, yes, but I'll not see Rome become his eternal thrall. Trust this, I protect what's mine." His gaze lingered on Dacia, the words laced with double meaning. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken pull of their bond. Dacia felt it too, a heat uncoiling in her core, urging her toward him even as danger loomed. Cassius nodded slowly, resolve hardening his features. "Then I'm with you. The younger Cassius will not fade into obscurity. Tell me how we begin." Dacia outlined the plan in hushed tones. Networks of sympathetic scribes to alter the proscription rolls, hidden missives to senators in hiding, divinations to guide their strikes. Cassius absorbed it all, his mind sharp despite his ordeal. As they spoke, the urgency built, each word a thread weaving their fragile alliance. But the catacombs were not empty. Far above, in the labyrinth's twisting paths, the echo of boots reverberated. Quintus the Blade Maximus and his squad, mortal hunters serving immortal masters. Sulla had doubled the patrols after whispers of subversion reached his ears, and Quintus, with his scarred face and unyielding zeal, was the perfect blade for the task. Marius stiffened first, his head tilting like a hound scenting prey. They're close. 2 turns to the east tunnel. We move now. Dacia extinguished the lamp with a swift breath, plunging them into near darkness. Her prophetic sight, enhanced by her awakening, pierced the gloom better than mortal eyes. She grabbed Cassius's hand, pulling him along as Marius took point, his movements fluid and lethal. The trio darted through narrow passages, the walls closing in like the jaws of some subterranean beast. Bones crunched underfoot. Relics of the first turning, when vampires first clawed their way from Etruscan soil. Dacia's heart raced, not just from fear, but from the adrenaline surging through her veins, mingling with the bond's intoxicating fire. "This way," Marius hissed, veering into a side crevice barely wide enough for one. Cassius squeezed through, his breath ragged. Dacia followed, her body brushing against Marius's in the confines. The contact ignited sparks, his cool skin against her warmth, the scent of his ancient blood mingling with hers. Even in flight, desire flickered, forbidden and fierce. Behind them, voices echoed, "Spread out! The slave witch and her vampire dog, they're here!" Quintus's growl cut through the stone. "Find them! Sulla wants heads, not excuses." They pressed on, emerging into a wider chamber lined with alcoves, each holding skeletal remains adorned with faded amulets. Marius scanned for an exit, his mind racing. The plough of purges lay hidden here somewhere from their earlier escape, a divine weapon that could end elders like Sulla. But now was not the time. A patrol rounded the corner, torches blazing. Quintus led them, his blade drawn, eyes gleaming with fanatic light. "There!" he bellowed, spotting the fugitives. Marius whirled, shoving Dacia and Cassius behind a bone-strewn pillar. "Stay down!" He lunged into the fray, a blur of shadow and steel. His gladius met Quintus's with a clash that rang through the chamber. Sparks flew as they dueled, Marius's immortal strength pitted against Quintus's mortal fury. The enforcer was no novice. Scars from 100 hunts marked his arms, and his blade sought Marius's heart with precision. Dacia crouched, her mind whirling. She couldn't let Marius fight alone. Not when the bond screamed for unity. Drawing on her divine spark, she whispered an incantation from Aradia's teachings, her fingers tracing symbols in the air. A veil of shadow thickened around them, muffling sounds and dimming the torch's glow. Cassius, wide-eyed, drew a dagger from his belt. "I can help." "No," Dacia snapped. "Live to fight another day. We need you free." The clash continued, Marius disarming one patrolman with a savage twist, his fangs sinking into another's throat in a spray of arterial blood. The metallic scent filled the air, stirring Dacia's senses. Quintus pressed him, their blades locking. "Traitor!" Quintus spat. "Sulla will have your head on a pike." "Tell him hello," Marius growled, kneeing the man in the gut and hurling him back. But more patrols poured in, their numbers swelling. Marius retreated, bloodied but unbowed, grabbing Dacia and Cassius. "Run!" They fled into a forgotten tunnel, the shadows herding them like allies. The passage narrowed to a crawl, forcing them on hands and knees through choking dust. Dacia's lungs burned, her mind flashing to the Dacian mines where her enslavement began. Darkness as oppressor, now as savior. At last, they emerged into a disused grate near the Tiber's banks, the river's rush masking their gasps. Dawn's first light crept over the horizon, a pale promise amid the urgency. Cassius slumped against the wall, trembling. That was too close. Marius wiped blood from his lip, his eyes locking on Dacia. The fight had ignited something primal in him, the bond pulsing with raw need. "We escaped, but Quintus won't stop. Sulla suspects. Word from the villa says he's summoning me. Tension rises. Our seeds must take root swiftly." Dacia nodded, stepping closer to Marius. The adrenaline crashed into desire, her body aching for his touch. In the alcove of river reeds, hidden from prying eyes, she pressed against him, her lips finding his in a fierce kiss. His hands roamed her back, tracing the tattoos that marked her divinity, pulling her tunic aside to expose skin fever hot. "Not here," Cassius muttered, averting his eyes, though a flush colored his cheeks. Marius broke the kiss, his voice a husky whisper against Dacia's ear. "Go, Cassius. Begin the whispers in the hidden forums. We'll meet again in 3 nights." Cassius slipped away into the morning mist, leaving them alone. The urgency of their escape fueled the fire between Dacia and Marius. He lifted her against the cool stone, her legs wrapping around his waist as his mouth claimed her neck, fangs grazing without breaking skin. The bond thrummed, amplifying every sensation. His cool strength against her warmth, the river's murmur, a counterpoint to their ragged breaths. Dacia's fingers tangled in his hair, urging him on. "We can't. Not with Sulla closing in." "We must," he murmured, his hand sliding beneath her tunic, fingers exploring the slick heat of her desire. "This bond, it sustains us. Let it." She arched into him, the world narrowing to the press of their bodies. He entered her with a groan, slow and deliberate, each thrust a defiance against the shadows pursuing them. The spice of their union was extra fierce, laced with the risk of discovery. Her cries muffled against his shoulder, his pace quickening as the bond wove pleasure and power. Climax shattered them both, a release that echoed the rebellion's spark. As they parted, sated but vigilant, Dacia straightened her tunic, her eyes fierce. "The seeds are planted. Now, we water them with blood." Marius pulled her close, his expression grim. A messenger bird had arrived at dawn, a summons from Sulla, etched in wax. "Return to the Curia. Explain the whispers." Tension coiled tighter. Their narrow escape had bought time, but the dictator's suspicion loomed like a storm over Rome. In the catacombs' depths, rebellion stirred, fragile yet unyielding. Dacia felt Tages within her, the ploughed god ready to upheave the earth once more. Chapter 12. Blood in the Furrows. The Forum Romanum pulsed with the raw heartbeat of Rome's fury. Marble columns etched with the boasts of long-dead consuls stood sentinel over a sea of chaos. Torches sputtered in the chill night air, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters across the blood-slicked flagstones. The proscription lists, nailed to the rostra like grim decrees from the gods, fluttered in the wind, their ink still wet with the names of the damned. Screams echoed off the temples, mingling with the clash of swords and the wet thud of bodies hitting the ground. Sulla's purge had reached its zenith, a symphony of death orchestrated by the undead. Dacia Corvinus pressed against the rough-hewn base of the Temple of Jupiter, her heart hammering like a war drum. The air reeked of iron and fear, blood from the freshly slain soaking into the furrows of the ancient pavement, where rainwater once carved paths for libations to the gods. Now, those channels ran red, carrying the essence of Rome's enemies to the underworld. Her tattooed arms, marked with Dacian runes that glowed faintly under her skin, itched with the pull of her awakening power. The blood bond with Marius thrummed in her veins, a constant reminder of the chain that both bound and freed her. Marius Sanguis moved like a shadow among the enforcers, his vampire senses sharp amid the carnage. His dark cloak billowed as he directed Quintus the Blade Maximus and his squad toward the next cluster of marked men. 800 years of unlife had honed him into a weapon of Sulla's will, but tonight, doubt gnawed at his immortal core. Dacia's presence at his side, hidden in the throng, was both salvation and damnation. Their forbidden passion, forged in the heat of the villa's hidden chambers, had cracked the armor of his loyalty. He could still taste her blood on his tongue from their last stolen night. The sweet tang of divinity mingled with mortal fire. "Cassius is there," Dacia whispered, her voice cutting through the din like a prophet's decree. She pointed toward the far end of the forum, where a young senator's son, marked for his popularis leanings, was cornered against the steps of the Basilica Aemilia. Cassius the Younger fought valiantly, his gladius flashing in the torchlight, but the noose of proscribers tightened. 3 of Quintus's men circled him, their blades thirsty for the kill. Marius's jaw clenched. Cassius was no mere name on a list. He was the spark Dacia had fanned into rebellion's flame in the catacombs. Saving him meant defying Sulla outright, inviting the dictator's fangs to their throats. But the bond pulsed hotter, urging him forward. "Stay hidden," he growled, slipping into the fray. Dacia's eyes narrowed. Hidden? No. The visions that plagued her sleep demanded action. She had seen this moment in the entrails of a sacrificial goat, blood furrowing the earth, a god rising from the soil. Her hands trembled as she stepped from the shadows, the crowd parting instinctively before her. Whispers rippled. The Dacian slave prophetess, the one who read fates in guts and spared the unworthy. Cassius parried a blow, his breath ragged. "For the Republic!" he shouted, but his voice cracked with desperation. A sword grazed his shoulder, drawing blood that sprayed across the stones. The enforcers laughed, their faces twisted in Sulla's zeal. Then Dacia was there, a whirlwind of dark hair and glowing tattoos. She thrust her hand forward, palm up, and the air thickened with unseen power. "By the blood of Tages, I claim this life." Her voice boomed, echoing off the temples like thunder from the Capitoline. The ground trembled faintly, the furrows in the pavement cracking as if ploughed anew. The nearest enforcer froze, his blade hovering mid-swing. Blood welled from his nostrils, unbidden, trickling down to stain his tunic. He gasped, clutching his chest, before collapsing in a heap. The others whirled on her, eyes widening in recognition. The witch! Kill her! But Dacia moved with unnatural grace, her prophetic gifts blooming into something divine. She seized the arm of the second man, her fingers digging into flesh. His veins lit from within, a crimson glow racing toward his heart. He screamed as his blood reversed its flow, bursting from his eyes and mouth in a gory fountain. Cassius staggered back, awe and horror mingling on his face. Marius burst through the line, his sword a blur. He decapitated the last enforcer with a single stroke, black blood, vampiric ichor spraying the air. He grabbed Dacia's arm, pulling her close. "What have you done? You've painted a target on us both." His eyes, those ancient Etruscan depths, burned with a mix of fear and fierce pride. She met his gaze, her chest heaving. Saved a life. Saved the future. Their bond sang between them, electric, drawing their bodies nearer, even as death swirled around. His hand lingered on her waist, a ghost of their passion, before he shoved her toward Cassius. "Go. The tunnels. Now." But the forum erupted. From the arches of the portico of Minerva, figures emerged, vampire hunters from the Optimate's coven, led by Fausta Cornelia. Her golden hair gleamed like a crown of malice under the moonlight, her fangs bared in a predator's smile. "The reborn Tages," she hissed, her voice silk over steel. "Sulla will reward me richly for your head, slave." Fausta's entourage fanned out, a dozen shadows with eyes like burning coals. They moved faster than mortals, blurring across the flagstones, claws extended. Dacia shoved Cassius behind her, raising her hands. The power surged, wild and untamed, drawing from the blood pooling at her feet. She felt it. The ancient furrows of the earth calling to her, Tages' voice whispering of plows and prophecies. One hunter lunged, his talons raking toward her throat. Dacia twisted and the ground split beneath him, a furrow opening like a maw. He tumbled in, bones snapping as the earth reclaimed him. Another came from the side, but Marius intercepted, his fangs sinking into the attacker's neck. He drank deep, the vitae fueling his rage, before hurling the corpse aside. Cassius, sword in hand, joined the fray, guarding Dacia's flank. "I owe you my life, prophetess. Let me repay it." His blade met a hunter's, sparks flying. The battle spilled across the forum, bodies piling in the sacred space. Dacia's interventions grew bolder. With each gesture, she pulled blood from the veins of her foes, weaving it into shields or whips of crimson. But the hunters adapted, their numbers swelling as word spread. Fausta circled, waiting for an opening, her jealousy a venomous undercurrent. "Marius, my love," she taunted, "you bed this mortal filth. Come back to your true kin." Marius snarled, blood dripping from his chin. "You're poison, Fausta. Always were." He charged her, their clash a storm of fangs and fury. She dodged, laughing, her nails scoring his arm. The wound healed instantly, but the pain fueled his doubt, loyalty to Sulla, his sire, warring with the bond to Dacia. From the heights of the rostra, a figure watched, Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix, the dictator himself. His white toga, stained with the night's offerings, billowed as he descended the steps. His face, eternally youthful yet lined with centuries of cruelty, twisted in rage. "Treachery!" he bellowed, his voice carrying like a legion's command. The remaining enforcers halted, turning toward him. Sulla's eyes, red as fresh spilled wine, fixed on Dacia. "You dare defy the gods of Rome?" "I am Rome." He extended a hand, and shadows coalesced around him, vampiric power drawn from the coven bonds he commanded. The air grew heavy, pressing down on Dacia like the weight of empires. She staggered, the divine spark within flickering. Visions assaulted her, plowed fields of flesh, blood gods buried under Roman boots, Marius's heart pierced by the ancient plow. "No," she gasped, roots of power digging into the earth through her feet. The furrows widened, blood rising like a tide, forming a barrier against Sulla's assault. Marius broke from Fausta, positioning himself between Dacia and the dictator. "Sire, this ends now. She's under my protection." His voice cracked, the sire bond pulling like chains forged in the first turning. Sulla laughed, a sound like grinding bones. "Protection? You are mine first, boy. Kneel or join the proscribed." He flung a bolt of shadow, striking Marius in the chest. The vampire general crumpled, ichor bubbling from his lips. Dacia screamed, the sound raw and primal. Rage ignited her core, the reincarnation fully awakening. She plunged her hands into the blood-furrowed ground, channeling Tages's essence. The forum shook, columns cracking as ethereal plows of light scored the earth. Blood erupted in geysers, ensnaring the hunters, dissolving their forms into mist. Fausta lunged at Dacia, claws outstretched. "Die, goddess!" But Dacia turned, her eyes glowing with otherworldly fire. She grasped Fausta's throat, blood pouring from the vampire's pores, reversing the unlife that sustained her. Fausta withered, her beauty crumbling to dust, a sacrificial offering to the old gods. Sulla advanced, his power clashing against Dacia's. You cannot unmake what Rome has built. Their forces met in a cataclysm, shadow versus blood, empire versus divinity. The air crackled, the furrows widening into chasms that swallowed lesser vampires whole. Marius rose, weakened but defiant. He seized the plough of Tages from the shadows, retrieved from the catacombs in their flight, and drove it towards Sulla. The dictator parried, but the ancient weapon hummed with power, weakening his defenses. Dacia channeled everything. Her Dacian roots, the bond with Marius, the screams of the purged. Her body arched, tattoos blazing like furrows ploughed by divine hands. Power flooded her, godhood claiming her humanity in a blaze of ecstasy and agony. She felt Marius's love as a tether pulling her back from the abyss. With a final cry, she unleashed it. Blood waves crashed over Sulla, eroding his form. He howled, the sire of Rome's vampires dissolving into the gutters he had filled. The forum fell silent, save for the drip of residual vitae. Dacia collapsed to her knees, Marius catching her. Their lips met in a desperate kiss, blood and passion mingling. "It's over," he whispered. But she knew it was only beginning. Around them, Cassius rallied the survivors, the seeds of rebellion blooming in the blood-soaked earth. Dacia's powers hummed fully now, tigers reborn in flesh and furrow. Rome's shadows had shifted, and the empire of blood would never be the same. As dawn crept over the Capitoline, painting the carnage in gold, Dacia stood, hand in Marius's. The old gods whispered promises of war, of love forged in sacrifice. The proscriptions were broken, but the true purge, of vampire rule, had just begun.